Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been carrying this memory for over 60 years now, but it's never faded. Not one bit. I was 15 years old in January of 1958 when it happened. We lived just outside Auburn, Nebraska, farming country through and through. Not mountains, not deep forests like you hear in most of these kinds of stories, just flat farmland, creeks and scattered woodlots. My family wasn't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. Dad worked at the grain elevator in town, and Mom kept things running at home. I was the oldest of 4 kids, so I had responsibilities. One way I earned my own money was by running a trap line along Muddy Creek that cut through our property and several neighboring farms. Nothing fancy, just muskrat, raccoon, and the occasional mink. The fur prices were decent back then, and it taught me to be responsible. That morning was bitterly cold, probably around 5 degrees above zero. The sky was that pale winter blue that never seems to warm anything. There was about 4 inches of snow on the ground from a storm earlier that week, with more forecast for later that day. I bundled up in my heaviest clothes. Long underwear, flannel shirt, 2 pairs of socks, my dad's old hunting coat that was still too big for me, and a wool hat pulled down over my ears. My dog Smokey always came with me. He was a mutt, part German Shepherd, part who knows what, with a thick grey coat that made him look like he'd been rolled in wood ash. That dog lived to chase rabbits. Normally on these trap runs, I'd hardly see him. He'd race off through the brush, nose to the ground, and I'd hear him crashing around in the distance while I checked my traps. He'd show up every 10 minutes or so, tongue lolling out, eyes bright with excitement, before disappearing again. But not that morning. From the moment we left the house, Smokey stuck to my side like he was glued there. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just too cold for him to want to run. But then, I noticed he kept looking back over his shoulder, and occasionally he'd let out this low growl, so quiet I could barely hear it over the crunch of snow under my boots. "What's the matter, boy?" I asked him once, but he just pressed closer to my leg. I had about 12 traps set along a 2-mile stretch of the creek. The first 4 were empty, which wasn't unusual in this weather. The 5th had a muskrat, already frozen stiff. As I reset the trap, I realized Smokey was standing right behind me, staring into the bare thickets along the creek bank. His ears were pricked forward, and that low growl was constant now. "You see something? A rabbit?" I asked, but he didn't move. At each trap, it was the same. Smokey stayed right with me, always alert, always watching. He never wandered off once. By the time we reached the 9th trap, I was getting a little spooked myself. The wind had picked up, making that hollow winter sound as it pushed through the leafless trees. The trap was set at the bottom of a steep bank, about 8 feet down from the level of the surrounding field. There was a small ledge there where muskrats would swim by. Normally, Smokey would wait at the top while I climbed down to check it. That day, he followed me, picking his way carefully down the slippery bank. The trap was empty. As I knelt to reset it, my fingers already numb despite my gloves, I felt something change in the air around me. It's hard to explain, like when a storm is about to break and you can feel the pressure drop. Except this wasn't weather. This was something else. Smokey wasn't growling anymore. He was dead silent, pressed against my leg so hard I nearly lost my balance. I could feel him trembling. That's when I felt it, this overwhelming sense of wrongness, like I was being watched by something that shouldn't exist. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and my mouth went completely dry. My hands froze over the trap. For a few seconds I couldn't move at all. Then slowly, I stood up and turned around to face the bank. There, at the top of the bank, standing between 2 bare cottonwood trees, was something. Even now, 60 years later, I struggle to describe it accurately. It was tall, at least 7 feet, maybe taller. It was covered in hair, not fur exactly, but long, shaggy hair, dark brown or maybe black, hard to tell in the winter light. The hair covered its entire body except for its face. And the face, God, the face. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. The skin was a grayish color, like clay that's been left out to dry. The eyes were set deep, dark, and they were staring right at me. Its nose was flat and wide, and its mouth... I remember thinking its mouth looked too wide for its face, like it could open up much farther than it should. The smell hit me then, like something rotting, something that had been dead for days. Even in that cold air, the stench was overwhelming. It just stood there, perfectly still, staring down at me. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were frozen to the ground. Smokey was absolutely silent beside me, trembling so hard I could feel it through my heavy clothes. I don't know how long we stood like that, probably only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then, without any warning, it turned away. It didn't turn like a person turns. It was more fluid, almost like its waist could rotate further than should be possible, and then it moved away from the bank. It didn't walk like a person either. It was half walking, half loping, like its legs were too long for its body. Each stride covered more ground than seemed possible. That broke whatever spell had been holding me in place. I scrambled up that bank so fast I barely remember doing it, my boots slipping in the snow, my hands grabbing at frozen grass and roots. Smokey was right behind me. When I reached the top, panting and terrified, I saw it again. It was moving across Olson's field toward an old wooden gate in the fence line. The gate was at least 6 feet high. As I watched, the thing reached it, and without breaking stride, it just went over. It didn't jump like a person jumps. It just sort of flowed over the gate without touching it, like gravity meant nothing to it. Then it continued across the next field until I lost sight of it. I stood there gasping for breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Smokey was pressed against my legs, still silent. The wind picked up again, bringing more of that rotting smell, and then it was gone. I should have checked for tracks. That's the thing that's bothered me ever since. I should have gone to where it had been standing and looked for footprints or any other sign. But I was 15 and terrified out of my mind. All I wanted to do was get home. I abandoned the rest of my trap line and ran most of the way back. Smokey stayed right with me, no longer looking around but focused straight ahead, like he couldn't get home fast enough either. When I got home, Mum took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I lied, said I'd fallen through some ice and gotten wet, which explained why I was shaking. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid she wouldn't let me go out trapping alone anymore, and despite what happened, I still needed that money. But more than that, I was afraid no one would believe me. I avoided the creek for almost a week after that. When I finally went back to check my traps, I took Dad's .22 rifle with me. Smokey came along but stayed closer than he used to. I never saw the creature again, but every time I went near that steep bank, my stomach would knot up and I'd get that same feeling of wrongness. It snowed heavily that night after the encounter, so even if I had gone back to look for tracks, they would have been covered. That's probably for the best. I'm not sure I wanted confirmation of what I'd seen. The thing that's always bothered me is where it could have gone. Auburn is farm, country, fields, small woodlots, creeks and scattered farms. There's nowhere for something that big to hide without being seen. It's not like out west with vast forests and mountains where a creature could disappear. In Nebraska farmland, everyone knows what's on their property. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years, but what I saw wasn't quite like the descriptions I've read. It moved differently, and that face, Bigfoot is supposed to have an ape-like face, but what I saw was something else entirely. I'm 77 years old now. I've lived a full life, seen a lot of things, but nothing that's ever matched what I saw that cold January morning. I've never told this story publicly before. My wife knew. I told her about 10 years after we were married, but she's gone now. My kids don't know. How do you tell your children you saw something impossible? I still don't know what it was. I don't believe it was a man in a costume, not in 1958 in rural Nebraska, and not moving the way it did. No human could have cleared that gate the way that thing did, and no costume could have created that feeling of absolute wrongness that came over me. Smokey lived to be 13 years old, and until the day he died, he never went near that part of the creek again. If I tried to head that way, he'd plant himself and refuse to move. Dogs know things we don't. I still dream about it sometimes. In my dreams, it doesn't turn away. In my dreams, it comes down the bank toward me. I always wake up before it reaches me, my heart racing, that smell of rot in my nostrils. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in this world. It felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain, like it was a mistake, something that shouldn't exist here. And I've spent 6 decades wondering if anyone else has ever seen it, or if I'm the only one who knows it's out there somewhere. Story 2. I've never really told this to many people outside my family. I guess part of me is still afraid nobody will believe me, or worse, they'll think I made it all up for attention. But what happened to me, what's been happening on my family's land for years, isn't something I could make up if I tried. It was the summer of '73 when I first saw it. I was 5 years old, playing in my grandparents' front yard in southeastern Oklahoma. Their farmhouse sat on this big piece of land that backed right up to dense woods, the kind where the trees grow so close together that by mid-afternoon it already looks like dusk in there. My parents had gone into town for supplies, and my grandparents were out in the barn. I remember I was playing with these little plastic farm animals, lining them up along the edge of the porch steps. It was hot, crazy hot like it gets in Oklahoma summers, and the cicadas were making that constant buzzing sound. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead and thinking about sneaking inside to get a popsicle from the freezer. That's when I felt it, this weird feeling like I was being watched. You know how the air changes sometimes? Like pressure dropping before a storm? It was like that, but worse. I looked up toward the tree line, maybe 40 yards from the house. At first I didn't see anything unusual, but then something moved. Not like a deer or even a bear would move. This was different, taller. I froze, still holding a little plastic horse in my hand. Then it stepped forward, out from between 2 oak trees. I still have trouble describing what I saw that day. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall. It was covered in dark hair, not like fur exactly, more like really long, matted hair. The color was a muddy brown-black. But what I remember most was how it moved. Not like an animal on all fours, but upright, on 2 legs, swinging its long arms. And its face, God, its face was flat, but somehow still protruded, like a person's face, but not right, not human. I don't remember dropping my toys, but I must have, because suddenly my hands were empty and I was running toward the house. I've never moved so fast in my life. I heard something behind me, heavy footsteps, quick ones. I didn't look back. I just ran straight into the house, slamming the screen door behind me. I dove behind the couch in the living room, wedging myself between it and the wall. I was shaking so hard I thought I might throw up. From my hiding spot, I could see the front door through this little gap between the couch and an end table. Then the screen door creaked open. I stopped breathing. I swear my heart stopped too. Through that tiny gap, I could see a massive hairy arm push the door wider. The smell hit me then, like wet dog and something rotten mixed together, so strong it made my eyes water. It didn't come all the way in. It just stood there, half in and half out, like it was hesitating. I heard this deep, rumbling breathing. Then it made a sound, this high-pitched noise that wasn't quite a howl, but definitely wasn't anything human. It was like a roar, but higher, almost like it was trying to call something. After what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds, it backed away. The door swung shut. I stayed frozen behind that couch for hours, until I heard my parents' truck pulling up outside. I never told them, or my grandparents. Who would believe a 5-year-old kid claiming she saw some giant hairy monster? They'd think I was making it up or having nightmares. So I kept it to myself, pushed it down, tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild. For years, I avoided playing alone in the yard. I'd make excuses to stay inside or only go out when other people were around. My parents probably thought I was just a homebody, but really, I was terrified of seeing that thing again. Time passed. I grew up. The memory faded a bit, became less sharp around the edges. By the time I was in high school, I'd almost convinced myself it really had been my imagination. Then came the summer of '89. We were having this big family reunion at my grandparents' farm. I was 21 by then. My brother Jason was 19, home from his first year of college. One afternoon, we decided to explore some of the old fire roads that cut through the woods at the back of the property. We took his beat-up Chevy, bouncing down those overgrown trails, windows down, radio playing. We'd gone maybe 2 miles from the house when Jason killed the engine so we could get out and look at this old hunting blind our grandfather had built years ago. The woods were quiet, that heavy, thick kind of quiet that feels like it's pressing in on your ears. We were standing there, Jason pointing out how the blind was starting to collapse on one side when we heard it. That sound. The same high-pitched roar I'd heard 16 years earlier. It echoed through the trees, bouncing around so we couldn't tell which direction it came from. Jason grabbed my arm. What the hell was that? I couldn't speak. My whole body went cold, then hot, then cold again. That sound had been living in the back of my mind for all those years, and hearing it again was like being 5 years old all over again. Sarah, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. We got back in the truck fast. Jason kept trying to start the engine, but it took 3 tries before it caught. The whole time, I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see that massive figure step out from between them. Finally, as we were bumping back down the fire road toward the farmhouse, I told him everything. About the creature I'd seen as a kid, how it had followed me onto the porch, the smell, the sound, that exact same sound we'd just heard. Jason didn't laugh or dismiss it. He just drove, knuckles white on the steering wheel, asking questions now and then. What did it look like exactly? How tall? Did it seem aggressive? I answered as best I could, but how do you really describe something that shouldn't exist? I believe you, he said finally as we pulled up to the house. I don't know what it was, but I believe you saw something. Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. For the first time, I didn't feel crazy or like I'd imagined the whole thing. 2 years later, in '91, our Uncle Tom took his kids to the backside of the property to cut firewood. He had his 3 kids with him, plus our cousin Beth. They rode out on the wagon behind his old tractor, making a day of it. They were about an hour into cutting when it happened. Uncle Tom was just finishing up a cut with the chainsaw when Beth suddenly started gagging. Then they all smelled it, this powerful, musty stench. Uncle Tom described it later as sharp enough to make your eyes water, like wet animal fur mixed with something dead and rotting. The smell was so strong and came on so suddenly that the youngest, Annie, actually threw up. Without explanation, Uncle Tom ordered everyone back on the wagon. He didn't even finish the cut he was making or gather the tools. They just left everything and took off back toward the house. Later that night, I overheard him talking to my dad on the porch. Something wasn't right out there, Frank. That smell, it wasn't natural. And right before it hit us, everything went quiet. No birds, no nothing. I wanted to tell him about what I'd seen, what Jason and I had heard, but I didn't. Some part of me was still afraid to say it out loud, like naming it would make it more real somehow. Then came the summer of '95. Jason was back from grad school, and he brought his friend Mike to stay at the farm for a few days. They decided to camp out on this hill about a half-mile from the house, a spot we'd camped at dozens of times growing up. They set up their tent, built a fire, grilled some burgers, and drank beers until around midnight before turning in. Jason told me later that he woke up sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning. The fire had burned down to embers, sending a heavy trail of smoke drifting south. He was just about to roll over and go back to sleep when he heard it, a loud, deep grunt or growl right outside their tent. Not a bear, not a coyote, nothing he'd ever heard before. He said he lay there, frozen, listening as whatever it was sniffed heavily, like it had caught the scent of the smoke or maybe the leftover food. After a minute, he reached over and shook Mike awake, clamping a hand over his mouth before he could speak. They both heard brush moving as something large pushed through it, heading back toward the deeper woods. They waited until dawn before unzipping the tent. They searched the area but found no tracks, no hair, nothing, just some broken branches along the tree line. But Jason knew. He finally believed my story completely because he'd experienced something himself. We've had other strange things happen over the years. Tools moved from where people left them, livestock acting skittish for no reason, that smell appearing suddenly and then vanishing, strange calls in the night that don't match any known animal. I'm 45 now. I've researched what I saw, what we've all experienced in different ways. Some people would call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Others might say it's just bears or overactive imaginations. I don't know what to call it. I just know what I saw that day as a 5-year-old was real. Sometimes when I visit the farm, I still get that feeling of being watched. The woods seem to hold their breath. And I wonder if it's still out there, that shadow from my childhood, moving between the trees, watching our family come and go, generation after generation. I've never seen it clearly again like I did that first time, but I know it's there. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is blowing from the south, I swear I can still hear that high, strange call echoing through the trees. Story 3. I still can't explain what I saw at Florissant Fossil Beds last September, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Some things are better left unexplained, I guess, but I need to tell someone about this because it's been eating at me for months. I was in Colorado Springs for a 6-week assignment with my company. I'm an environmental consultant, and we were working on impact assessments for a new development project. The work itself was pretty routine, but being in Colorado was a nice change from my usual office in Seattle. I'd been there about 3 weeks when this happened. That particular weekend, I had nothing planned and decided to explore some of the natural areas around Colorado Springs. I'd heard about the Florissant Fossil Beds National Monument from a co-worker who said it was worth checking out. Not super crowded like some of the more famous parks, but still really interesting if you're into geology and nature walks. The night before I went, there was this massive rainstorm. I remember sitting in my Airbnb listening to it pound against the windows for hours. It was the kind of heavy, persistent rain that makes you glad to be indoors. By morning, though, the sky had cleared up completely. It was one of those perfect Colorado days. Bright blue sky, crisp air, probably around 45 degrees when I left my place around 7 in the morning. I drove out to Florissant, which took maybe 40 minutes from where I was staying. The roads were still wet from the rain, with puddles everywhere, but the drive was beautiful with the sun rising over the mountains. I had my coffee in the cup holder, windows cracked to let in that fresh mountain air, and was just enjoying being alone with my thoughts. I pulled into the park right as they opened at 8. The parking lot was completely empty, except for what I assumed was the ranger's truck. I grabbed my day pack with water, some trail mix, and my camera, then headed to the visitor center to check in and get a map. Inside there was just one ranger, a guy probably in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and the typical ranger uniform. He seemed a bit surprised to see anyone that early, especially after the storm. "Morning, you're an early bird," he said, looking up from whatever paperwork he was doing. I explained I was only in town temporarily and wanted to make the most of my free day. He was super friendly, asking about where I was from and what brought me to Colorado. When I asked about trail recommendations, he suggested the main nature trail. It's a simple dirt path, not too strenuous, maybe 3 miles round trip. You'll get good views of the fossil beds and the forest. Just stick to the marked trail. The ground's going to be pretty soggy after last night's downpour. He handed me a park map, pointed out the trailhead, and I headed out. The morning air was cold enough that I could see my breath, and everything smelled so fresh after the rain, that mixture of wet earth and pine that you can only get in mountain forests. The trail started out easy enough. It was well maintained near the visitor center, with some educational signs about the prehistoric lakebed that once covered the area and the fossils they've found there. As I walked further, the path narrowed and became more of a simple dirt trail winding through the trees and open meadows. I hadn't seen another soul since leaving the ranger station, which was exactly what I wanted. Just me and nature. I could hear birds calling in the trees and the occasional rustle in the underbrush from what I guessed were squirrels or chipmunks. The ground was definitely soggy, like the ranger had warned. In some spots, my hiking boots sank an inch or so into the mud. About 20 minutes in, maybe 3/4 of a mile from the trailhead, I came to a section where the path descended slightly toward what looked like a small lake or pond through the trees on my left. The trail here was really muddy from the rain, almost squishy with each step. That's when I noticed the tracks. At first I just saw what were clearly elk tracks coming from the forest on my right. It looked like a small herd had walked onto the trail during the night. You could see where they'd come from the trees, walked along the path for about 50 yards, then veered off to the left, probably heading down to the water. I've seen plenty of elk tracks before. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I'd been hiking since I was a kid, so this wasn't unusual. What made me stop dead in my tracks was what I saw overlapping some of those elk prints. There were these footprints, human-looking footprints, except they were enormous. I'm not exaggerating when I say they were at least 16 inches long. They were clearly defined in the soft mud, heel, arch, and 5 toes, just like a human foot, but massively oversized. I remember crouching down to look at them more closely, my heart suddenly racing. They were deep impressions, suggesting whatever made them was heavy. And the stride length between them was incredible, much longer than what even a tall person could manage comfortably. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of prank. Maybe someone had made fake feet to wear and was stomping around the park at night. But who would do that? Especially in near freezing temperatures after a rainstorm, and the prints were barefoot, no shoe treads or anything. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures, though the lighting wasn't great under the tree cover. I even put my own boot next to one print for scale. My size 8 hiking boot looked like a child's footprint next to whatever had made these impressions. What really got to me was the realization that these tracks were fresh. They had to have been made sometime after the heavy rain stopped in the early morning hours. The edges were still sharp, not softened by time or additional rainfall. And they followed the elk tracks, almost. Like whatever made them was following the herd. I stood there for a good 5 minutes just staring at these prints, trying to make sense of them. A cold feeling that had nothing to do with the temperature crept up my spine. I suddenly became very aware of how alone I was on this trail. The forest around me seemed to go silent, or maybe that was just my imagination running wild. Part of me wanted to turn around and head back to the visitor center immediately. But curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the tracks a little further. They continued along the trail for another 100 feet or so before veering off with the elk tracks toward the lake. I hesitated at the point where they left the trail. The ranger had specifically said to stick to the marked path. Plus, the ground sloped steeply down toward the water, and after all that rain, it looked slippery and dangerous. I decided not to follow further, but I did take a few more pictures and tried to see if I could spot anything down by the water's edge. Nothing was visible from where I stood. After that, I couldn't really enjoy the rest of the hike. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees and jumping at every sound. The peaceful solitude I'd been enjoying earlier had transformed into something tense and uncomfortable. I finished the loop much faster than I normally would have, practically speed walking the last mile back to the visitor center. When I got back, there was still no one else around except the same ranger. He looked up and must have noticed something was off in my expression. "Everything okay out there?" he asked. I hesitated before saying anything. I didn't want to sound crazy or like I was making things up. But those prints were real. I had photos on my phone, and I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen them. I saw something weird on the trail," I started, feeling a bit awkward. There were elk tracks, which I expected, but there were also these really large footprints, like human footprints but massive, barefoot. I expected him to look surprised or concerned, maybe even grab his radio to report possible trespassers in the park. Instead, he gave me this strange little smirk and a knowing look that made my stomach drop. "Bigfoot," he said, just that one word, so casually it caught me completely off guard. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. No, seriously, these were huge prints. Who would be out there barefoot after a rainstorm? He shrugged. "You'd be surprised how many reports we get, especially after storms when the ground's soft enough to leave good impressions." I couldn't tell if he was messing with me or if he actually believed what he was saying. Either way, it wasn't the response I expected. "You want to file an official report?" he asked, but his tone suggested he already knew my answer. "No," I replied quickly. "No, that's okay. I was just curious." He nodded like he'd heard this before. "If you're interested, there's a bulletin board in the community center in town with some local, enthusiast meetings posted. They collect these kinds of stories." I thanked him awkwardly and headed back to my car. As I walked across the still empty parking lot, I felt weirdly exposed, like something was watching me from the tree line. I kept glancing back at the forest edge, half expecting to see, I don't even know what. Once in my car, I immediately looked at the photos I'd taken. They were exactly as I remembered, massive, barefoot human-like prints alongside and sometimes overlapping elk tracks. The size comparison with my boot was particularly unsettling. I sat there for a few minutes, engine running, heater blasting, just staring at these pictures and trying to make sense of them. I never did go to those enthusiast meetings the ranger mentioned. I didn't want to be associated with Bigfoot hunters or conspiracy theorists, but I've spent hours online since then, reading about similar encounters and looking at other footprint photos from around the country. Some look fake or exaggerated, but others look exactly like what I saw. I finished my work assignment in Colorado 3 weeks later and flew back to Seattle. I've told a couple of close friends about what happened, but they just laughed it off or suggested it was someone playing a prank. Maybe they're right. Maybe there's a perfectly logical explanation. But I can't stop thinking about those prints, their size, their depth, the way they followed the elk herd. And I can't forget the ranger's reaction, how unsurprised he seemed, like this was just another Tuesday for him. Whatever made those footprints, it was out there walking barefoot through a cold, wet forest in the middle of the night, following a herd of elk. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I wonder, what if I'd arrived at the park just a little earlier that morning? What might I have seen instead of just footprints? Story 4. I've been terrified to write this out, but I need to share it with people who might understand. I'm still struggling to make sense of what happened to me, and honestly, I don't sleep right anymore. This all started about 3 months ago at my place in rural South Carolina. I live alone in a small house that belonged to my grandparents. It's nothing fancy, just a single-story home on about 2 acres of land with woods behind it. My nearest neighbor is about a quarter mile down the road. I've always loved the quiet out here, but now I'm not so sure. That night started like any other. It was a Tuesday in mid-October. and I'd just gotten home from my shift at the warehouse where I work. I was dead tired after a 10-hour day of loading pallets. The temperature had dropped unexpectedly, so I cranked up the heat, took a shower, and crawled into bed early, around 7 p.m. My bedroom has this old window AC unit that I've never bothered to remove during colder months. There's always this small gap between the unit and the window frame that I usually stuff with an old t-shirt, but I'd forgotten to do it that night. The curtains don't quite cover it either, leaving a sliver where you can see outside. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, not really paying attention to anything, when I felt this, I don't know how to describe it, this weird sensation, like when you feel someone staring at you. My eyes drifted over to that gap by the AC unit, where the yellow glow from the yard light was spilling in. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was this massive dark shape hunched down outside my window. I froze completely. The yard light we have is this old sodium bulb that casts everything in this sickly yellow glow, and it was partially illuminating. God, I still get chills thinking about it. A face, not a human face. The skin was this dull, matte black color, not shiny like it was wet or oily, but almost like velvet that absorbs light. Around its face was this coarse black hair. Not fur exactly, but thick, wiry hair that stuck out in patches. But it was the eyes that still haunt me. They were deeply set in its skull, like they were sunken in, but they were fixed directly on me. There was intelligence there, calculation. I couldn't move. I literally could not make my body respond. We just stared at each other. After what felt like forever, it slowly turned its head toward my neighbor's property, as if checking something, then turned back to continue watching me. That brief movement showed me more of its profile. The head was shaped wrong, too elongated at the back. The most terrifying part wasn't just seeing it, it was what I felt from it. This wasn't some curious animal that had wandered up. Whatever this thing was, it felt malevolent, threatening, like it was there specifically for me. It wasn't just looking, it was studying me, sizing me up. Eventually, I managed to tear my eyes away. I turned my back to the window, squeezed my eyes shut, and started whispering under my breath, "Please go away, please go away." I don't know if I was praying or just trying to comfort myself. I lay there rigid with fear until I must have fallen asleep from exhaustion. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, or maybe a strange shadow from a tree branch. I even went outside to check if there were footprints or any signs something had been there. Nothing. The ground was hard-packed dirt by that side of the house, so there wouldn't necessarily be prints, but it helped me pretend nothing had happened. 3 nights later, I was getting ready for bed around the same time. I'd almost pushed the incident out of my mind when I glanced at that gap again. It was back, exact same position, same hunched posture to get down to window level, same angle, same calculating stare. This time I could see more clearly that its shoulders were massive, way too big for any person. The proportions were all wrong. I scrambled to the far side of my bed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't take my eyes off it this time. It didn't move for at least 5 minutes, just watched me. Then it shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a hand gripping the edge of my window frame. The fingers were too long, with knuckles in the wrong places. Eventually, it disappeared from view. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat up with my back against the headboard until sunrise, jumping at every little sound. The next day, I called in sick to work. I spent the morning going to the hardware store and buying aluminum foil. I covered every gap in every window of my house, taping it thoroughly so not even a sliver of light could get in or out. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever that thing was, it wanted to get in. 2 nights passed without incident. I started to breathe easier, thinking maybe the foil had worked or that the thing had moved on. Then, on the 3rd night, around 11 p.m., I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, almost gentle tapping on my bedroom window. right where the AC unit was installed. 3 taps, then silence. I held my breath, praying it would stop. Tap, tap, tap. It went on for almost 20 minutes before stopping. The next night, same thing, and the next. Always 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 more. Never aggressive, never trying to break the glass, almost like it was politely knocking, asking to be invited in. That somehow made it worse. After a week of this, the tapping stopped. For 2 blessed nights, there was nothing. I started to think maybe whatever it was had finally given up. I was exhausted, barely functioning at work, jumping at shadows. I needed to believe it was over. Then came the night that confirmed my worst fears. I was in the kitchen washing dishes around 8 p.m. We have this motion-activated light on the back step that illuminates a small concrete pad outside the kitchen door. I heard it click on, which wasn't unusual. Sometimes raccoons or stray cats trigger it. I glanced up casually through the kitchen window, expecting to see some small animal. Instead, what entered the beam of light were 2 massive, hairy legs. They were walking through the light, unhurried, just strolling past. The light only caught them from about mid-thigh down, but what I saw was unmistakable. The legs were muscular, covered in thick, dark hair from thigh to foot. Not like a bear's fur, more like extremely hairy human legs, but wrong. The proportions were off, the knees bent slightly differently. The stride was fluid, almost graceful. 2 steps, and they were past the light's range, disappearing into the darkness beyond my property. I dropped the plate I was washing. It shattered in the sink, but I barely noticed. I ran through the house, checking every door and window, making sure everything was locked. I pushed furniture against the doors. I grabbed the only weapon I had, a baseball bat I keep under my bed, and sat in the hallway where I could see both the front and back doors. I stayed there all night, bat in hand, jumping at every creak and groan of the house settling. When dawn finally came, I was still sitting there, stiff and sore, but alive. After that night, I installed security cameras around the property. I bought better locks, motion sensor lights for every corner of the house. I even looked into getting a gun, though I've never owned one before. The cameras have caught nothing, not even when I hear the tapping at night, which still happens every few days. It's like this thing knows exactly where the blind spots are, or maybe the cameras just can't capture it. I've tried researching local legends, asking subtle questions to neighbors about strange sightings. Most people just give me weird looks. One old-timer at the local diner did mention that the area has stories of dark watchers in the woods, but he laughed it off as tales to scare children. It's been 3 months now. The tapping still happens occasionally. Sometimes I hear heavy footsteps on my roof at night. Twice I've found strange scratches on my door in the morning, 3 parallel lines deep into the wood. I don't know what this thing wants from me. I don't know why it chose my house, my window. All I know is that it's still out there, watching, waiting. And sometimes, when I'm driving home late and my headlights sweep across the edge of the woods by my property, I catch a glimpse of something tall moving between the trees, keeping pace with my car. I'm writing this because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. I need to know I'm not losing my mind. And I need to know how to make it stop. Because I can't live like this much longer. Whatever this thing is, it's patient. And I have the terrible feeling it's not going anywhere. Last night I woke up at 3 a.m. to find all the power in my house was out. As I fumbled for a flashlight, I heard those now familiar 3 taps on my bedroom window. Then, for the first time, I heard something else. A low, rumbling sound that might have been speech, but in no language I've ever heard. I still don't know what it said, but when the power suddenly came back on minutes later, I found my front door standing wide open. I never unlocked it. Story 5. I still can't explain what I saw that day. I've tried to rationalize it for 3 years now, but nothing makes sense. I was hoping someone here might have experienced something similar or could offer an explanation that doesn't make me sound crazy. I've been fishing the Sioux River near Big Rock in Bayfield County since I was in my 20s. I'm 43 now, so we're talking about 20 years of knowing practically every bend, pool and riffle in that stretch. It's my sanctuary, where I go to clear my head and connect with nature, or at least it was, until that day in late September 3 years ago. The weather was perfect that morning. Crisp autumn air, overcast but not threatening rain. Water levels slightly higher than normal from a rainfall the previous week. I had the day off work and decided to hit one of my favorite spots about 2 miles upstream from the main access point. Most weekend warriors don't venture that far, which is exactly why I like it. I parked at the usual lot around 6:30 in the morning, geared up with my chest waders, vest and 9-foot fly rod. I packed light but brought the essentials: a few fly boxes, extra tippet, forceps, nippers and a small net. I also had my trusty wading staff, since parts of the river can get pretty slippery. My thermos of coffee and a couple of granola bars completed my setup. The hike in was uneventful, just the familiar sound of gravel crunching under my boots and the occasional rustling in the underbrush from squirrels or chipmunks. As I got closer to the river, that beautiful white noise of flowing water grew louder. It's a sound that normally calms me, but for some reason that day, something felt different. Not necessarily wrong, just different. I remember dismissing it as my imagination. I reached my spot around 7:15 and spent about 20 minutes just observing the water, looking for rises or any signs of insect activity. The river was running clear despite the recent rain, with that beautiful tea-colored tint from the tannins. I spotted a few caddisflies skittering across the surface, so I tied on a size 16 elk hair caddis and began working my way upstream. I caught and released 3 decent brown trout in the first hour, nothing huge, but healthy fish in the 12 to 14-inch range. The fishing was good enough that I decided to push farther upstream than I usually go, into a stretch I hadn't fished in maybe 2 years. It was around 9:30 when I entered a section where the river narrows between 2 steep banks, creating faster water that eventually opens into a wider, calmer pool. The left bank was densely wooded, while the right had a narrow sandbar that extended about 30 yards before the tree line resumed. The morning fog had mostly burned off, but thin wisps still clung to the water's surface in shadier spots. I was wading carefully, keeping my footing on the slick rocks. The current was pushing against my legs, not dangerously strong, but enough that I had to concentrate on each step. The water was up to mid-chest in spots, so I was using my wading staff to test the depth before committing to a step. That's when I saw it. About 60 feet ahead, at the edge of the sandbar where it met the waterline, stood something I still struggled to describe. It was dark, not just dark-colored, but a deep, light-absorbing black. It stood upright on 2 legs, maybe 3 to 4 feet tall. Its proportions were wrong. The arms seemed too long for its body, hanging down almost to where knees would be. I couldn't make out facial features from that distance, but the head seemed slightly too large for the frame. For about 3 seconds, we just looked at each other. I froze mid-step, my wading staff planted in the riverbed, water flowing around my legs. It stood perfectly still on the sandbar, as if assessing me. Then it moved. God, how it moved. In one fluid motion, faster than anything I've ever seen, it launched itself forward. Not a run, not a jump, but something else entirely. Its arms extended outward as it propelled itself toward the water. The movement was so quick, it literally blurred in my vision, like when you wave your hand rapidly in front of your face. One moment it was standing at the edge of the sandbar, the next it had cleared at least 10 feet and hit the water with a splash that seemed too small for the distance it had covered. And then, nothing. I stood there, heart pounding in my ears, waiting for it to resurface. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes, 3. The water where it had entered remained undisturbed except for the natural flow of the current. No bubbles, no ripples, no sign that anything had been there at all. My first coherent thought was that it must have been an animal I was familiar with, a mink or fisher cat maybe. And my mind was playing tricks on the proportions. But minks don't stand upright like that, and they certainly don't move the way this thing moved. I considered a bear cub, but again, the movement wasn't right. Bears don't launch themselves like that, and a cub would have resurfaced quickly. This thing just vanished. For several minutes, I didn't move. I kept my eyes fixed on that spot, scanning the water for any disturbance. My knuckles had turned white from gripping my wading staff. The peaceful sounds of the river now seemed ominous, masking whatever might be moving beneath the surface. Eventually, I began to back away slowly, not wanting to turn, my back on that section of river. Only when I had retreated around the bend did I finally turn and wade more quickly toward the shore. My hands were shaking so badly I had trouble breaking down my rod. I should have investigated. I know that now. I should have carefully made my way to that sandbar to look for tracks or any evidence of what I'd seen. But the combination of fear, the difficult wading conditions, and the weight of my gear convinced me to just get out of there. It's a decision I've regretted countless times since. The hike back to my car is mostly a blur. I remember constantly looking over my shoulder and stopping to listen for sounds that didn't belong. Every snapping twig made me jump. I've never felt so exposed in woods that had always been a second home to me. When I got home, I immediately began researching local wildlife, hoping to find a rational explanation. I've considered everything from river otters to beavers to escaped exotic pets. Nothing fits. Whatever I saw moved with a deliberate intelligence that still unnerves me. I didn't go fishing for 2 months after that. When I finally returned to the river, I stayed well downstream of that spot. I've never gone back to that particular section, though I've thought about it many times. Part of me wants answers, wants to validate what I saw, but a stronger part fears finding those answers. I've told only a few close friends about this encounter. Most gave me that look, the one that says they think I'm exaggerating or that my mind played tricks on me. One suggested I saw a black bear cub that swam underwater to escape, which is the most plausible explanation I've heard, but it still doesn't account for that bizarre, lightning-fast movement. The thing that disturbs me most is how this creature has eroded my connection to a place I've loved for 2 decades. The Sioux River was always where I felt most at peace, most in tune with the natural world. Now, even when I fish other sections, I find myself scanning the shoreline, startling at shadows, waiting for that dark figure to appear again. I've tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a strange confluence of light, shadow, and an ordinary animal behaving in an extraordinary way. But deep down, I know better. What I saw that morning wasn't something that belongs in our understanding of the natural world. 3 years later, I still wake up sometimes with the image of that black shape frozen in my mind. Not the moment it stood watching me, but that impossible instant of movement, arms outstretched, body a blur against the morning light, before it vanished into water that should have been too shallow to conceal it. Whatever it was, it knew I was there. It reacted to my presence, and sometimes on those nights when the memory is particularly vivid, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting for me to return. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Am I losing my mind, or is there something in those woods that science hasn't catalogued? I need to know I'm not alone in this. Story 6. I still get chills every time I drive that stretch of Interstate 15 between Great Falls and Helena. What happened last winter wasn't something I ever thought I'd experience, and to be honest, I'm still trying to make sense of it. I've always considered myself pretty level-headed. I'm not the type to jump at shadows or buy into cryptid stories. But what Jake and I saw that night, I just can't explain it. It was a Friday in late January, just a few months ago. Jake and I had driven up to Great Falls for the day to visit his sister and her new baby. We stayed for dinner, probably longer than we should have since we both had work the next day, but it was around 9:30 when we finally said our goodbyes and headed back toward Helena. The temperature had dropped to something ridiculous like 15 below zero. The sky was perfectly clear, and you could see every star imaginable. One of those crisp Montana nights where everything feels still and quiet. We had the heat blasting in Jake's old Ford F-150, and I remember I was fiddling with the radio trying to find something other than static since reception gets spotty on that stretch. I've made this drive countless times. I grew up in Helena and have lived in Montana my whole life. I've seen pretty much every animal this state has to offer. Elk crossing the road at dusk, the occasional mountain lion slinking across the highway, bears foraging near the shoulder in spring. I've spent weekends hiking, camping, and hunting since I was a kid. I know what's supposed to be out there and what isn't. We were maybe 20 minutes south of Great Falls, in that stretch where the interstate winds between the mountains. It was around 10 o'clock, and there was barely any traffic, just the occasional semi passing in the opposite direction. Jake was driving, and I was half dozing with my head against the window. The heater was making that rattling sound it always does when it's really cold out. We came around this bend in the road. I could point to the exact spot if you drove me there, and Jake suddenly eased off the gas. The truck slowed slightly, and I sat up straight, thinking maybe there was an animal in the road or some black ice he'd spotted. But the road was clear. Instead, our headlights swept across the mountainside to our right, and that's when I saw it. About 150 yards up the slope stood this figure. I still don't know what else to call it. It was standing upright, completely still, facing toward the road. The first thing that struck me was how it stood out against the snow. Stark white, not off-white or grayish or yellowish like a mountain goat might appear in headlights, but pure white, like fresh printer paper white. The second thing I noticed was its size. This thing was tall, really tall. I'm talking at least 7 or 8 feet, maybe more. It had a distinctly humanoid shape, head, broad shoulders, long arms, standing on 2 legs. But the proportions were all wrong for a human. The arms hung too low, the torso too broad. For those few seconds as we passed by, it just stood there, completely motionless, like it was watching us. I remember my brain frantically trying to categorize what I was seeing. Not a bear, wrong shape, wrong color, wrong season to be active. Not a mountain goat or sheep, too large, wrong shape entirely. Definitely not a deer or elk. Not a mountain lion, not a dog, not anything that should exist in those mountains in January. I was still processing what I'd seen, my mouth hanging open, when Jake said in this weird, quiet voice, "You believe in Bigfoot?" My skin erupted in goosebumps. Not because he'd mentioned Bigfoot, but because his question confirmed he'd seen it too. I wasn't hallucinating or imagining things. "What the hell was that?" I whispered back. My heart was suddenly pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. "I don't know," Jake said, gripping the steering wheel tighter and checking the rearview mirror. But it wasn't right. We were both quiet for a minute, and then I asked him to describe what he'd seen, just to make sure we were seeing the same thing. His description matched mine perfectly. The unnatural height, the white color, the humanoid shape, the stillness of it. "Should we go back?" I asked, not really wanting to, but feeling like maybe we should. Jake just shook his head. "No way. Not at night. Not without, I don't know, something." I didn't argue. The idea of turning around and driving back to that spot made my stomach knot up. Instead, I turned in my seat to look out the back window, half expecting to see headlights behind us, or worse, that white figure somehow on the road. But there was nothing, just darkness. We drove in silence for a few miles, both of us processing. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. It was 15 below zero out there, There were no houses nearby, no parking areas, nothing but wilderness for miles. The nearest access point would have been miles away. Who would be out there in those conditions at that hour? And if it was some kind of prank, someone in a costume, why? That stretch of road isn't heavily traveled, especially late on a winter night. A prankster would have to stand out there in killing cold for hours just for the chance that someone might drive by and catch a 2-second glimpse. It made zero sense. Maybe it was some kind of weird snow formation, I suggested, not believing it myself. The shape had been too distinct, too obviously bipedal. Jake shook his head again. It was watching us, Catherine. I saw its head turn as we passed. I hadn't noticed that detail, and it sent another wave of goosebumps across my skin. I checked the locks on the doors, an instinctive reaction that I realized was ridiculous. We were in a moving vehicle, miles away from the thing now. We spent the rest of the drive trying to rationalize what we'd seen. Could it have been someone in a winter survival suit? But why would they be standing motionless on a mountainside in the dark? A research project of some kind, but there would have been equipment, lights, a vehicle somewhere, some kind of rare albino animal standing on its hind legs. But nothing that size exists in Montana, and no animal would stand so still, so human-like. By the time we got back to Helena, we'd gone through every possible explanation and discarded them all. The only thing we knew for certain was that we had seen something that shouldn't exist. That night I barely slept. I kept seeing that white figure in my mind, imagining it moving, following us somehow. I know that sounds ridiculous. We were in a truck going 70 miles an hour, and it was on foot in the wilderness. But there was something about its stillness, its deliberateness, that suggested purpose. The next morning, over coffee, Jake suggested we drive back up there in daylight. Part of me wanted to prove to ourselves that there was a rational explanation, that in daylight we'd see it was just a weird-shaped tree or a geological formation or something explainable. But another part of me, a stronger part, didn't want to go anywhere near that spot again. What if it's still there? I asked. Jake didn't have an answer for that. We ended up compromising. We didn't go back that day, but a week later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, we made the drive. We knew roughly where we'd seen it, but pinpointing the exact spot was harder than we expected. The mountainside looked different in daylight, and everything was covered in snow. We pulled over at what we thought was the right location and got out of the truck. The cold hit me like a physical blow. Even with the sun out, it was maybe 5 degrees, and the wind cut right through my coat. We stood on the shoulder of the interstate, looking up at the mountainside. There was nothing there, no strange white figure, no tracks in the snow that we could see from that distance, nothing unusual at all. Jake wanted to hike up there, but I talked him out of it. The slope was steep, covered in snow and probably ice underneath. Neither of us had proper gear for that kind of climb, and honestly, I was afraid of what we might find, or worse, what might find us. We got back in the truck and drove home. We've talked about it many times since then, trying to make sense of it. We've looked up cryptid sightings in Montana, read about Bigfoot encounters, searched for any reports of similar sightings along that stretch of I-15. We found nothing that matched what we saw. I've never been a believer in the supernatural or cryptids or anything like that. I've always thought there's a rational explanation for everything if you look hard enough. But this I can't explain. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just some weird trick of light and shadow, or that maybe I dozed off and dreamed it. But then I remember Jake saw it too, exactly as I did. It's been a few months now, and I still get a knot in my stomach whenever we have to drive that road. I find myself scanning the mountainside every time we round that curve, half afraid, half hoping to see that figure again, just to prove to myself that it was real, that I'm not losing my mind. Whatever it was, some unknown animal, a person with some inexplicable reason to be there or something, else I can't stop thinking about it. Was it just passing through, or does it live in those mountains? Are there more of them? And most disturbing of all, Was it watching the road intentionally, waiting for someone to pass by? I don't have answers to any of these questions. All I know is what I saw that night. A tall, pure white, humanoid figure standing on a mountainside in sub-zero temperatures, watching as we drove by. And sometimes, when I'm driving that stretch of road alone at night, I swear I can feel something watching me from those dark mountains. Story 7. I've been holding this in for almost 25 years, and I need to get it off my chest. I was 10 years old when it happened back in '99, and it completely changed how I feel about the woods. This all went down on April 26th, 1999. My cousin Jake, who was 12 at the time, and I were playing at my parents' property near Darrington, Washington. We lived on this big piece of land in the foothills. Nothing fancy, just a regular house with a lot of forest around it. My dad had helped us build this awesome treehouse about a quarter-mile from the main house. Nothing special, just some plywood floors, walls, and a roof. But to us, it was our fortress. That day was a Monday, but we had the day off from school for some teacher training thing. It was getting close to evening, probably around 7:30 or so, and the sun was starting to set. We'd spent most of the day in that treehouse, reading comic books and playing with our Game Boys. Normal kid stuff. I remember I was sitting on the edge of the treehouse platform, dangling my legs over the side, when I noticed something weird. There were these chicken hawks circling around this one particular tree about 100 feet away. I'd never seen hawks act like that before. They were making this awful squawking noise and diving at the tree like they were attacking something. At first, I thought maybe there was a nest or something they were protecting, but then I noticed the tree itself was shaking. Not like when there's a breeze. This was violent shaking, like something massive was moving around inside it. The tree was huge, probably 60 or 70 feet tall, and the whole thing was swaying back and forth. "Jake, come look at this," I called to my cousin who was still inside the treehouse. He came out and stood beside me, and we both watched as the tree kept shaking. The hawks were going crazy, circling and diving. "What do you think it is?" I asked him. "I don't know," he said, but I could tell by his voice that he was getting scared. I was too. Then we heard this weird sound, kind of like wood splintering. The tree shook even harder, and suddenly Jake grabbed my arm. "Let's go back to the house," he said, his voice cracking a little. I didn't argue. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, like that feeling you get when you know you're not supposed to be somewhere. We scrambled down the ladder and started running toward the main house. We'd only made it about 50 feet when we heard this massive crashing sound behind us. It was so loud that both of us stopped for a second. I'll never forget the sound, like something heavy hitting the ground after falling from a height. Jake yelled, "Don't look back, just run!" But I did look back. I couldn't help it. And what I saw, I still have nightmares about it. There was something standing where that tree had been shaking, something big. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Was it a bear? But I knew instantly it wasn't a bear or any animal I'd ever seen before. It was tall, taller than my dad, who's 6'2". It had this dark, almost black silhouette against the dimming sky. What really got me, though, were its eyes. They were glowing red, like two burning coals. Not reflecting light like how animal eyes sometimes do in headlights. These were actually glowing from within. The worst part was when it started moving toward us. It didn't run like a person runs. It was fast, way too fast for something that size. And its arms, they were long, hanging down almost to its knees. Its hands didn't look right either. They seemed too big for its arms, with fingers that were too long. I only saw it for maybe 2 seconds before I turned and ran faster than I ever had in my life. I could hear it coming behind us, this weird shuffling sound mixed with what sounded like heavy breathing. The ground seemed to shake with each step it took. Jake was ahead of me, and I remember being terrified that I was going to be the one it caught since I was falling behind. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly, but pure fear kept me going. We burst out of the tree line and into the clearing where our house was. I remember screaming for my mom and dad as we ran. I could still hear that thing behind us, but it seemed to slow down once we reached the open area. We made it to the back porch and practically fell through the door. My mom was in the kitchen making dinner, and my dad was watching TV in the living room. They both jumped up when we came crashing in. I completely lost it. I was crying so hard I couldn't even speak. Jake wasn't much better, but he managed to blurt out something about something chasing us from the woods. My dad grabbed his shotgun and went outside to look around while my mum tried to calm us down. I was shaking so badly that my teeth were chattering, and I couldn't stop crying for what felt like forever. When my dad came back in, he said he hadn't seen anything, but he looked worried. He asked us what had scared us, and that's when things got weird. My parents decided to separate us and ask us individually what we'd seen, probably thinking we were making up stories or something. I told my mom exactly what I'd seen: the hawks, the shaking tree, and then that thing. I described the glowing red eyes, the long arms, the strange hands and feet, and how incredibly fast it moved. When they brought Jake and me back together, they looked really concerned because apparently we'd described exactly the same thing, down to the smallest details. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept my bedroom curtains closed tight and had every light in my room turned on. Every noise made me jump. I kept imagining that thing outside my window, looking in with those glowing red eyes. The next day, Jake and I went back to the treehouse, but only because my dad came with us, carrying his shotgun. We dismantled the whole thing, took down all the boards, the platform, everything. Neither of us wanted that treehouse anymore. It didn't feel like our fortress anymore. It felt like a trap. We never played in that part of the woods again. Before that happened, I was always outside, fishing, exploring, building forts. After that day, I couldn't even walk to the edge of the forest without feeling panic rising in my chest. It completely changed me. To this day, I get anxious when I'm in dense woods alone. A few weeks later, I overheard my parents talking when they thought I was asleep. My dad mentioned that earlier that spring, he'd been out looking for our dog who'd gone missing for a couple days. He found this weird area in the woods where there was deer fur scattered all over the place, but no bones, no carcass, nothing else, just fur. He thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it until after what Jake and I saw. Then, about a month after our experience, my mom came home looking pale after talking with one of the women at the grocery store. Apparently, some guy who worked for the Department of Forestry had reported seeing something similar in those same woods. He'd even filed some kind of official report about it. The description matched what Jake and I had seen. Large, dark figure, moved incredibly fast, long arms, bright eyes. The guy had also found some strange tracks in the snow earlier that year that he couldn't identify, so it wasn't just us. 3 separate people had seen the same thing in those woods. Whatever it was real. I'm 35 now, and I still can't explain what we saw that day. I've read about Bigfoot and other creatures people claim to have seen in the Pacific Northwest, but nothing quite matches what chased us. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just a bear or some other animal that fear transformed in my mind. But then I remember those glowing eyes and how it moved. No animal moves like that. Jake and I don't talk about it much anymore. We've both tried to put it behind us. But sometimes when we get together for family stuff and find ourselves alone, one of us will ask, "Remember that thing?" And we both go quiet because, yeah, we remember. We'll always remember. I still live in Washington, but I moved to the city. I tell people it's for work, but really, I just can't be near those woods anymore. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, feeling like I'm being chased. And sometimes, just before I fully wake up, I swear I can see those red eyes staring at me from the dark corner of my bedroom. Story 8. I'm not entirely sure if I should even be posting this. I don't talk about it much, even after all these years. The therapists I saw as a kid would probably say, this isn't healthy, digging it all up again. But there's something about seeing other people's encounters that makes me want to finally share mine. This happened back in 1976, when I was 7 years old. I remember the year clearly because it was right around when Star Wars came out, and that detail becomes important. I was in second grade at Lincoln Elementary, just outside Chicago, and our class was going on this big field trip to Des Plaines Dolomite Prairies, this nature reserve about 30 minutes away. I was so excited because I rarely got to go anywhere. My parents both worked long hours, and we didn't take many family trips. The morning of the trip, my mum packed me this special lunch with my favorite PB&J with the crusts cut off and those little hostess cupcakes I loved. I remember the weather was perfect, one of those early autumn days when it's still warm but not hot, with a light breeze. I was wearing my favorite red t-shirt with the dinosaur on it and these corduroy pants my grandma had bought me. We all piled into the school bus, 20-something second graders hyped up on excitement and unable to sit still. Mrs. Harmon, our teacher, kept trying to get us to quiet down, but you know how kids are. I sat next to Kevin, my best friend back then. We spent the whole ride talking about what animals we might see. I was hoping for a fox or maybe even a deer. When we arrived, a park ranger met us and started explaining about the prairie ecosystem and how we needed to stay on the trails. I remember being fascinated by his uniform and all the patches on it. He had this deep voice that commanded attention, even from a bunch of rowdy 7-year-olds. The ranger led us onto this woodland trail that cut through trees before opening up to the prairie. We lined up single file, and I ended up near the back because I'd stopped to tie my shoe when we were getting organized. I didn't mind though. I liked being able to look around without someone breathing down my neck. About 20 minutes into the hike, that's when it happened. I spotted this tiny turtle crossing the path, just inching along. It had this incredible pattern on its shell, browns and greens in these intricate shapes. I'd never seen a turtle in the wild before, only the ones at the pet store, and this one was so much prettier. I stopped to look at it. I just wanted to watch it for a second, maybe pick it up and feel its shell. I crouched down, completely absorbed by this little creature. I didn't realize everyone was moving on without me until I looked up and saw the last kid in line disappearing around a bend in the trail. At first, I wasn't worried. I could still hear voices ahead, and I figured I'd just catch up in a few seconds. I stood up and started walking a little faster than before, but as I rounded the bend, I couldn't see anyone. The voices seemed farther away now. I picked up my pace, almost jogging, but the trail forked, and I had no idea which way they'd gone. That's when I first felt it, that cold feeling in your stomach when you realize you're lost. I stopped walking and tried to listen for my classmates, but the woods had gotten quiet, except for the birds and the rustling leaves. I was about to call out when I heard something else, a sound from the woods to my left. It was like branches breaking, but heavier, more deliberate. I turned toward the noise, expecting to see the ranger or Mrs. Harmon coming to find me. What I saw instead is something I've tried to explain for decades, and nobody has ever fully believed me. About 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a thick oak tree, was what I can only describe as a giant, hairy person. I know how this sounds, but remember this was right around when Star Wars was popular, and my immediate thought was Chewbacca. It was tall, way taller than my dad, who was 6 feet, maybe 7 or 8 feet high. It was covered in this reddish-brown hair or fur that hung in matted clumps. Its arms were incredibly long, hanging almost to its knees. For a few seconds I just stared. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. This wasn't a person in a costume. The movements were too fluid, too natural. And we were in the middle of nowhere, not at a carnival or something. The creature seemed as surprised to see me as I was to see it. It tilted its head slightly, like it was studying me. Then it started swaying, this weird back and forth motion that wasn't aggressive, but wasn't normal either. I wanted to run. Every instinct was screaming at me to get away, but before I could move, it made this sound. Not a roar like you'd expect from something so big, but this low, vibrating moan that started soft and grew until it was almost deafening. It reminded me of an ambulance siren, but deeper, more primal. I could feel it in my chest, like when you stand too close to the speakers at a concert. My whole body vibrated with it. That's when the truly terrifying part happened. I tried to scream, tried to run, but I couldn't move, not even a finger. It wasn't like being frozen with fear. I've been scared plenty of times in my life, and that's not what this was. It was like something had disconnected my brain from my body. I was giving commands: lift your feet, move your arms, scream. But nothing was responding. I was trapped inside myself. And somehow, I knew it was doing this to me. This creature, this thing from the woods, had reached into my head and turned off the switches. I've never felt so helpless, before or since. Then it started walking toward me. Its gait was strange, a kind of rolling walk that was surprisingly graceful for something so large. It didn't seem angry or threatening, just purposeful. When it reached me, it crouched down a bit and looked at my face. Its eyes were deep-set and dark, intelligent in a way that scared me even more than if they'd been wild. I thought it was going to hurt me. I was certain this was it. I was going to die in these woods, and my parents would never know what happened to me. But instead, it reached out with these massive hands and gently, so gently you wouldn't believe something that size could be so careful, grabbed me under my armpits and lifted me up until we were face to face. The smell hit me then. Not awful, but musky and wild, like wet dog and earth and something else I couldn't identify. Its breath was warm on my face. I still couldn't move, couldn't even close my eyes. What happened next is hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. 1 second, I was staring into this creature's face, and the next, it was like I'd floated out of my body. I could see myself being held there, this small boy in a red dinosaur shirt, limp as a rag doll in the hands of this massive furry being. I was watching it all happen like it was a TV show, not something happening to me. And the strangest part, I wasn't scared anymore. All the terror just evaporated. I felt calm, almost peaceful. It wasn't natural. Looking back as an adult, I think it was doing something to my mind, changing how I felt. In this detached state, I noticed details I hadn't before. A scar running through the fur on its right shoulder, the way its nostrils flared slightly with each breath, the surprising gentleness in how it held me. Its eyes weren't fully black like I'd first thought, but a deep, deep brown. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time felt warped. It could have been seconds or minutes. The creature made another sound, softer this time, almost like humming. Then it slowly lowered me back to the ground. My feet touched the dirt path, but I still couldn't move. The creature backed away, still watching me. It raised one hand in what almost seemed like a gesture of farewell, then turned and moved back into the woods. The branches barely seemed to slow it down. It just melted into the forest like it belonged there. As soon as it disappeared from view, whatever hold it had on me snapped. I collapsed to the ground, my legs suddenly unable to support me. I gulped air like I'd been underwater. And then I started sobbing, these huge, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. That's how Mrs. Harmon found me a few minutes later, curled up on the ground, crying so hard I could barely breathe. She was furious, thinking I'd wandered off deliberately. She picked me up and carried me back to the group, scolding me the whole way for ruining the field trip for everyone. They were all heading back to the bus because they'd spent nearly 30 minutes looking for me. When I tried to tell her about the hairy giant, she just got angrier, telling me this wasn't time for making up stories. On the bus ride back, I tried telling Kevin, but he just laughed and said I was trying to get attention. By the time we got back to school, I'd stopped trying to explain. My parents were called, of course. They were upset I'd gotten separated from the group, but more concerned about how withdrawn I'd become. When I finally told them what happened, my dad got this look. Not disbelief exactly, but something close to it. He said I must have seen a bear standing on its hind legs, and my imagination filled in the rest. My mom suggested maybe I'd fallen and hit my head. No one believed me. Not one single person. That night, the nightmares started. I'd wake up screaming, convinced the siren monster, that's what I called it because of that strange moan, was outside my window trying to get in. Sometimes in the dreams, it would reach into my head again and take control, making me walk into the woods toward it while I screamed inside my mind. These night terrors lasted for years. My parents took me to doctors, then therapists. One suggested I'd experienced some kind of traumatic event on the field trip, maybe gotten lost and panicked, and my mind had created this monster as a way to process it. Another thought I might have an overactive imagination combined with anxiety. None of them considered that I might have actually seen what I said I saw. As I got older, I started researching. This was before the internet, so I'd ride my bike to the library and look through books about unexplained phenomena. When I found descriptions and sketches of Bigfoot encounters, it sent chills down my spine. Some of the details matched what I'd seen perfectly. I'm 44 now, with kids of my own. I've never taken them camping or hiking. My wife thinks I'm just not the outdoorsy type, but the truth is, I can't shake the fear that's followed me since that day. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I've heard that moan again. I've never gone back to that nature reserve, though I've been tempted many times as an adult, just to see if I could make sense of what happened. But something always stops me. Maybe it's fear, or maybe it's the knowledge that whatever I encountered that day wasn't something I was meant to understand. I still don't know what it was, or why it did what it did to me. Was it curious, protective, testing me somehow? All I know is that for a few minutes on an autumn day in 1976, something impossible reached into my mind and changed me forever. And no matter how many people tell me it was just my imagination, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the trees outside my house, I swear I can feel it watching me still. Story 9. I've lived near Sheridan Lake for almost 15 years now. It's remote, peaceful, exactly what I wanted when I moved here. Just me, my 2 sons who visit regularly, and my dogs. The wilderness has always felt like home to me, but last year everything changed. It started subtly in September of 2013. My dogs began acting strange, anxious, refusing to go into certain areas of the woods where they'd previously loved running. I've owned dogs my whole life, and I know when something's genuinely bothering them versus when they're just being difficult. This was different. They'd freeze at the tree line, hackles raised, and no amount of coaxing would get them to move forward. I noticed other things too. The deer population, which had been abundant in the area, seemed to vanish overnight. My property backs right up to deep forest, and I'd regularly see deer wandering through my yard or drinking from the stream that runs nearby. But suddenly, they were gone. Not just fewer of them, completely gone. The nights became unsettling. I'd wake up to weird sounds echoing through the trees, not the typical hoots of owls or yips of coyotes that I'm used to. These were different, a sort of chattering noise that's hard to describe, sometimes deep whooping sounds that carried across the lake. I've spent enough time in the wilderness to recognize most animal calls, but these didn't match anything I'd ever heard. I remember standing on my back porch one night, listening to that chattering noise moving through the woods behind my house. It seemed to circle around, never coming closer, but never really going away either. My dogs refused to go outside, cowering by the door instead. That's when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. About 3 weeks into these strange occurrences, I was fishing on the lake one afternoon. It was peaceful, the water was calm. One of those perfect fall days when the air is crisp and everything feels right. Then I heard it, a massive splash about 50 yards from my boat. This wasn't a fish jumping or a branch falling. This was big, like someone had thrown a refrigerator into the water. The ripples reached my boat, actually rocking it slightly. I scanned the shoreline, but saw nothing that could explain what I'd heard. That same day, walking back to my house from the dock, I found something that made my stomach drop. About 200 feet from my property line, in a small clearing, was a collection of deer bones, not scattered like you'd see, after predators had finished with a kill, but deliberately gathered and arranged in one specific location. Some still had bits of flesh on them, others were picked clean. The strangest part was that they hadn't been there the day before. I walk this path daily and would have noticed. As I stood there trying to make sense of it, that chattering sound started up again, seemingly all around me. I couldn't pinpoint the direction. It felt like whatever was making it was circling me, watching. I'm not easily frightened. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, all sorts of wildlife. But something about this made the hair on my neck stand up. I left quickly, the feeling of being watched following me all the way home. That night I contacted Thomas Steenberg, a Sasquatch researcher I'd heard about from a friend. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions about cryptids or monsters, but these occurrences were too strange to ignore, and Thomas had a reputation for taking reports seriously and investigating thoroughly. He documented everything I told him and suggested I keep a log of any further incidents. He also recommended I keep a camera handy. The next couple of weeks brought more of the same. Strange sounds, my dog's increasing anxiety, and that persistent feeling of being watched whenever I ventured too far into the woods. I started carrying my camera everywhere, though I wasn't sure what I was hoping or dreading to capture. Then came October 4th, a date that's permanently seared into my memory. The morning started normally enough. It was sunny but cool, typical fall weather for our area. I decided to photograph some of the areas where I'd found evidence of something. The strange bone collections had appeared twice more since the first incident, always in different locations, but with the same deliberate arrangement. I wanted documentation. Around 2 in the afternoon, I was near the edge of my property, taking pictures of some unusual marks I'd found on a tree trunk. 5 parallel grooves about 7 feet up, like something with claws had scraped the bark away. I'd just snapped a few shots when something made me look up toward my driveway, and there it was. Standing approximately 100 feet away was something I still struggle to describe even now. It was covered in dark brown fur, standing completely upright. My driveway sits on an incline, so I could only see the being from the waist up, but what I saw was enough to freeze me in place. The face, God, the face is what I remember most clearly, appeared whitish or grayish pink with fur surrounding it. It reminded me somewhat of a monkey's face, but with distinctly human qualities. The eyes were dark, intelligent, and fixed directly on me. Despite its slender build, the proportions were all wrong for a human. The torso was too long, the arms hanging down past where knees would be. And the height, even seeing only the upper half, I could tell this thing was massive. I had my camera in my hand. I had been literally taking pictures seconds before, but I couldn't move, couldn't raise the camera, couldn't press the button, couldn't even think to try. It was like my brain short-circuited from the impossibility of what I was seeing. The creature held my gaze for what felt like minutes, but was probably only a second or two. Then it moved, and the speed was unbelievable. It ran from right to left across my property with a fluid, powerful motion that no human could replicate. 2 seconds, maybe less, and it was gone, disappeared into the dense forest beyond my yard. I stood there for I don't know how long, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I finally managed to move again, my first instinct was to run inside and lock the doors. Instead, I forced myself to walk to the spot where I'd seen it cross. The ground there was soft from recent rain, but I couldn't find distinct footprints, just disturbed earth and vegetation, like something heavy had passed through. I called my sons who lived about 20 minutes away. They must have heard the panic in my voice because they arrived in record time. I told them what I'd seen, half expecting them to think I was losing it. But they've known me their whole lives. They know I'm not one for making up stories or exaggerating. The three of us walked the area where the creature had disappeared into the forest. About 30 yards in, we found something that sent chills through all of us. Freshly broken trees. Not small saplings, but trees 4 to 5 inches in diameter, snapped and pushed down along what appeared to be a path. These weren't old breaks. The wood was still green, the sap still flowing. And I drive through this area daily. This damage hadn't been there the day before. Based on the height of the breaks and comparing it to my tallest son, who's 6'2", we estimated the creature had to be at least 7 feet tall. The way the trees were broken suggested it had simply pushed through them at speed with incredible strength. What keeps coming back to me is the face. That grayish-pink color, almost like human skin, but not quite. It didn't have the aggressive, menacing look you see in movies or drawings of Bigfoot. It looked almost softer somehow. That's why I wonder if it might have been female or possibly younger. There was an intelligence in those eyes that I can't explain or forget. In the days that followed, I tried to resume my normal routines, but everything had changed. I don't go into the woods alone anymore. My dogs still refuse to venture into certain areas. The strange sounds continue occasionally, though less frequently now. Thomas Steenberg has visited several times to document everything. He's found more evidence, unusual hair samples caught on tree bark, more of those strange scratch marks high up on trees, and even what might be partial footprints in a muddy area near the stream. He's convinced I encountered a Sasquatch, and after what I saw, I can't disagree. I've lived in rural areas my entire life. I know the wildlife, I know the forests, I know what's supposed to be out there. This wasn't anything known to science. The speed, the size, the intelligence in those eyes, it was something else entirely. Sometimes at night, I still hear that chattering sound moving through the trees. Sometimes I think I see movement at the forest edge from my kitchen window. I keep my camera close now, always ready. But part of me wonders if I'd be able to use it if I saw that creature again. The shock of seeing something your brain tells you can't possibly exist is paralyzing. I don't expect everyone to believe me. I probably wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But something is out there in the woods around Sheridan Lake, something that's been there perhaps for centuries, avoiding human contact, watching from the shadows. And now, I know it's real. Every time I look toward that spot on my driveway, I can still see it standing there, watching me. Every time I hear a branch snap in the forest at night, I wonder if it's returned. The Sasquatch of Sheridan Lake isn't just a local legend anymore, at least not to me. Now it's a reality I have to live with every day in this remote place I once thought I knew so well. Story 10. I've been holding this in for years. I was a patrol officer in Marin County back in '76, and there's something I need to get off my chest about what happened that April night. I've told the official version plenty of times, but I've never shared how it really felt, what I really saw, or how it's haunted me ever since. My name's Dan Murphy. I was 32 then, had been on the force for about 8 years. My partner that night was Ed Johnson, a good cop, steady guy. We were working the night shift, which was usually pretty quiet in our area, just checking on businesses, responding to noise complaints, that sort of thing. Around 1 in the morning, we got a call from dispatch about a woman named Carolyn Morris who lived in one of those fancy hillside homes. She was reporting strange noises coming from the ravine below her property. Said she'd been hearing weird screeching and growling sounds for about an hour and was getting scared. Dispatch classified it as a possible wildlife disturbance, but something in the woman's voice had them concerned enough to send us out. It was a clear night, but dark as hell with just a quarter moon. Those hillside properties backed up to dense woods, the kind where the trees grow so thick they block what little moonlight there is. The Morris place sat right on the edge of one of those steep ravines that cut through the hills. When we pulled up, Mrs. Morris was waiting on her back deck in a bathrobe, looking down toward the ravine. She was a middle-aged lady, probably in her 50s, well-spoken, definitely not the type to call the police for nothing. She seemed genuinely rattled. "Officers, thank you for coming," she said, her voice shaking a little. "I know it sounds silly, but there's something down there. The noises, they're not like anything I've heard before, not a coyote or a mountain lion, something else." We asked her to describe what she'd heard, and she struggled to put it into words. It was like a screech, but deeper, then growling, and there was thrashing in the underbrush, something big. Ed and I shared a look. Probably a mountain lion with a kill, we figured. They were uncommon but not unheard of in the area. I told Mrs. Morris we'd check it out, asked her to go inside and lock her doors while we investigated. "Be careful," she said. "Whatever it is, it sounds big." We got our flashlights from the patrol car and drew our service revolvers as a precaution. Standard procedure when dealing with potential wildlife threats. The path down to the ravine was steep, just a dirt trail that wound down through the trees. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, but didn't penetrate very far into the thick growth. About halfway down, I started to get this feeling. Hard to describe it, the hair on the back of my neck standing up, a tightness in my chest. You develop instincts as a cop, and everything in me was saying something wasn't right. "You feel that?" I whispered to Ed. He nodded, his face looking ghostly in the reflected flashlight beam. "Something's off." We continued down, moving slower now, our footsteps crunching on the dry leaves and twigs. The ravine got steeper, the vegetation thicker. It was so quiet you could hear our breathing. That's when I noticed there were no other sounds. No crickets, no nightbirds, nothing. Like every living thing had cleared out. Then I heard it. A heavy breathing sound coming from about 30 yards ahead, down in the darkest part of the ravine. Crackling noises followed. The sound of something moving through brush, breaking branches, something big. "You hear that?" I whispered to Ed. "Yeah," he mouthed back, raising his revolver slightly. I swung my flashlight in the direction of the sound, and that's when my whole understanding of the world changed. In the beam of light, partially obscured by brush, was something moving on 2 legs. It was tall, I'd estimate 7 feet at least, dark-colored, a deep brown or black that seemed to absorb the light. It was walking upright, but it wasn't a man. The proportions were all wrong, too broad in the shoulders, arms too long. It moved with this fluid grace that nothing that size should have. For a split second it turned toward our lights. I caught a glimpse of its face, if you could call it that. It wasn't human, not even close. The features were all wrong, with a pronounced brow ridge and a snout-like mouth. The eyes caught the flashlight beam and reflected back with an amber glow, like a cat's eyes, but larger. Ed saw it too. I heard him swear under his breath, a quiet "Jesus Christ" that sounded like a prayer. The thing looked straight at us for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like forever. Then it moved. God, the way it moved. It turned and in 3 strides reached the 8-foot retaining wall that bordered one side of the ravine. With what looked like minimal effort, it grabbed the top of the wall and pulled itself up and over. No human could have climbed that wall that quickly. It would have taken me a ladder, or at least a running start, and someone giving me a boost. "What the fuck was that?" Ed hissed, his flashlight beam dancing wildly as his hand shook. I couldn't answer. My mouth had gone completely dry. I'd been a cop for 8 years at that point. I'd seen car accidents, dead bodies, the aftermath of violence. Nothing had ever hit me like this bone-deep wrongness of seeing something that shouldn't exist. "We need to go after it," I finally managed to say, though every instinct was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. "Are you serious?" Ed looked at me like I was crazy. "We have to. It's our job." Even as I said it, I knew we were out of our depth. Whatever that thing was, Our service revolvers weren't going to do much if it decided to come back. We made our way to the retaining wall, searching for any sign of where it had gone. The brush on the other side was trampled and broken, creating a clear trail leading deeper into the woods. But by unspoken agreement, neither of us suggested following it in the dark. "We'll come back at first light," I said, "with backup." Ed nodded, relief evident on his face. We made our way back up to Mrs. Morris's house. I don't mind admitting my hands were shaking so bad I could barely holster my weapon. We told her we'd spotted some wildlife, but couldn't identify it in the dark, and advised her to stay inside. We'd come back in the morning to do a proper search. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't even close my eyes without seeing that thing's face, those amber eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. I kept telling myself it was just a bear walking on its hind legs, or maybe some crazy person living in the woods. But I knew better. Whatever I'd seen wasn't anything I could explain. At dawn, Ed and I met up with 2 other officers who'd come on duty. We didn't tell them exactly what we'd seen, just that there might be a dangerous animal in the ravine. None of us wanted to sound crazy. The ravine looked different in daylight, less threatening, more ordinary. Just trees and brush and shadow, but the feeling of wrongness lingered. We found the first signs about halfway down, broken branches and disturbed earth, where something heavy had passed. Then the blood started. At first, just droplets on leaves, then more, until we were following a trail of it down into the deepest part of the ravine. The deer was in a small clearing, or what was left of it. Its neck had been broken, twisted almost completely around. The belly had been torn open, entrails pulled out and scattered. Chunks of meat had been ripped from the hindquarters. But it wasn't just the killing that disturbed me. I'd seen plenty of mountain lion kills before. It was the methodical nature of it. The way the deer had been disemboweled reminded me more of a hunter field dressing their kill than a predator feeding. "Mountain lion," one of the other officers suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Ed caught my eye. We both knew better. We searched the entire area but found no further sign of whatever had made the kill. No footprints clear enough to cast, no hair samples we could identify. Just the ravaged deer and our memories of what we'd seen in the darkness. The official report listed it as a probable mountain lion attack. What else could we say? That we'd seen some kind of unknown creature walking on 2 legs that could scale an 8-foot wall like it was nothing. We'd have been laughed off the force, maybe sent for psychological evaluations. So we kept quiet. Mrs. Morris moved away a few months later. Can't say I blame her. I stayed on the force for another 15 years before retiring. Never saw anything like that again, thank God. But I never went into the woods at night after that either. Never took my family camping like I'd always planned to. Some knowledge changes you. It's been more than 45 years now. Ed passed away back in 2018. Before he died, I visited him in the hospital. When everyone else had left the room, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "You remember that night in '76?" he asked. "Down in the ravine?" I nodded. "I've been telling myself all these years it was just a bear," he said, "or some crazy guy living in the woods. But it wasn't, was it?" "No," I said. "It wasn't." He nodded, like I'd confirmed something he'd always known. "What do you think it was?" I shook my head. "I don't know. Don't think I want to know." That was the last time we ever spoke about it. I'm 78 now. Don't have many years left, I expect. Before I go, I wanted someone else to know what really happened that night. Not the sanitized version in the police report. The truth. I saw something in those woods that shouldn't exist. Something that walked like a man, but wasn't one. Something strong enough to break a deer's neck and smart enough to process its kill like a hunter. Something with eyes that glowed amber in the darkness. I don't know what it was. Bigfoot? Some undiscovered predator? Something else entirely? All I know is what I saw, and that 47 years later, I still wake up sometimes with the image of those eyes burning in my memory. If you're ever in Marin County, in those hills where the expensive houses back up to the wilderness, and you hear strange noises in the night, don't go looking. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Story 11. I've debated for months whether to share this. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but I can't stop thinking about it. I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. This happened last August at our cabin. My husband Mark and I bought it 3 years ago as a weekend getaway. It's nothing fancy, just a 2-story wooden structure with a small kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms, and a deck overlooking the woods. We're completely surrounded by forest, except for the gravel road leading to the main highway about a mile away. Our nearest neighbor is at least half a mile down that road. We love it there because it's quiet. Too quiet sometimes, especially at night when the darkness feels absolute. But that morning, that August morning, the silence took on a different quality. We'd arrived Friday evening for a long weekend. Nothing unusual happened that night. We grilled some steaks, had a couple beers on the deck, watched the stars come out. Pretty typical cabin stuff. We went to bed around 11. I woke up around 6:30 the next morning. Mark was still asleep beside me. The bedroom window faces the backyard and the forest beyond. We usually keep the blinds down at night, not for privacy, there's nobody out there, but because the morning sun can be brutal. I don't know what made me get up and pull the blind that morning. Maybe I heard something? I honestly can't remember. I just remember sliding out of bed, walking to the window and pulling up the blind. The sun was just coming up, casting this golden light across our little clearing behind the cabin. There's about 40 or 50 meters of open grass before the dense tree line starts. We keep it cut short to discourage ticks and snakes. At first, everything looked normal, beautiful even. The morning mist was hanging low over the grass. Birds were starting to sing. Then I saw movement at the edge of the trees. "There's a man walking through our woods," I said out loud. Mark stirred but didn't wake up. My first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. We're miles from anything resembling a hiking trail. There's no reason for anyone to be back there. I figured maybe a hunter had gotten lost. But then this feeling came over me. I can't explain it properly. My skin got cold. The hairs on my neck stood up. Something deep in my brain, something primitive, screamed danger. The figure had emerged fully from the tree line now and was moving across our clearing. That's when I realized this wasn't a person, not a human anyway. It was tall, at least 6 feet, probably more. It had broad shoulders that tapered to a narrower waist. The entire body was covered in hair. Not fur exactly, but hair, medium brown with variations in the color. There was this patch on its side, catching the sunlight, that was more reddish-brown than the rest. But it was the way it moved that truly terrified me, so fluid, so effortless. It crossed that clearing in 3 long strides. 3, a distance that would have taken me 15 steps at least. There was a grace to it that seemed impossible for something that size. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, clutching the blind cord, watching. When it reached the far side of the clearing, it stopped. Then, and this is what haunts me most, it turned and looked directly up at our window, at me. Our eyes met. Its face was darker than the rest of its body, almost grayish, with less hair. I couldn't make out distinct features at that distance, but I could feel its eyes on me. I'm certain of it. We stared at each other for maybe a second, but it felt like minutes. Then it was gone, slipping back into the forest as silently as it had appeared. I stood frozen at that window for I don't know how long. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My hands were shaking. I felt cold and hot at the same time. "Mark," I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Mark, wake up." He grumbled something and rolled over. "Mark," I said again, louder this time. There was something outside. He sat up, blinking at me. What? Like a bear? I shook my head. No, not a bear. It walked on two legs. It looked at me. Now he was fully awake. A person. Should I get the gun? Not a person, I said. I don't know what it was. Mark got out of bed and came to the window. We both stared out at the clearing. Nothing moved except the grass stirring in the light breeze. What exactly did you see? He asked. I told him everything. The height, the hair color, the way it moved, how it looked directly at me. With each detail, his expression grew more skeptical. Sarah, are you sure you weren't half asleep? Maybe dreaming? I wasn't dreaming, I snapped. I know what I saw. But even as I said it, a small part of me wondered. It had happened so fast. Maybe the morning light had played tricks on me. Let's go look, Mark said, pulling on his jeans. I didn't want to go outside. The thought of stepping into that clearing made my stomach turn, but I also needed to know. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. We went downstairs and out the back door onto the deck. The morning air was cool against my skin. Birds were singing like nothing had happened. Everything looked completely normal. Mark walked down the deck steps and out into the clearing. I followed reluctantly, my eyes scanning the tree line. Where exactly did you see it come out? He asked. I pointed to a spot between two large pine trees. There, and it walked straight across to there. I indicated the opposite side of the clearing. Mark walked the path I'd described, looking down at the grass. I don't see any tracks, he said. The grass isn't even bent. That's impossible, I said. It was just here. We searched the entire perimeter of the clearing. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no hair caught on twigs. Nothing to indicate anything had passed through. Maybe it was a deer? Mark suggested, though he didn't sound convinced himself. They can look weird when they're standing on their hind legs. It wasn't a deer, I said flatly. I know what a deer looks like. We went back inside. Mark made coffee while I sat at the kitchen table, replaying the sighting in my mind. With each minute that passed, it felt less real, more dreamlike. Had I imagined it? Was I still half asleep? But the fear I'd felt, that had been real. That bone-deep, instinctive terror couldn't have been a dream. I barely touched my breakfast. Mark tried to distract me, suggesting we go fishing at the lake a few miles away. I agreed, hoping that getting away from the cabin might clear my head. But all day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound in the woods made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. Mark noticed, of course. You're really spooked by this, aren't you? He asked as we packed up our fishing gear that afternoon. Wouldn't you be? I countered. If you saw what I saw? He put his arm around me. Look, I believe you saw something. I just don't think it was, Bigfoot or whatever. I pushed his arm away. I never said it was Bigfoot. I just told you what I saw. The drive back to the cabin was tense. Part of me didn't want to go back at all. I wanted to pack our things and drive home to our safe, normal house in the suburbs, but that seemed ridiculous in the daylight. As we pulled up to the cabin, I scanned the surroundings carefully. Everything looked normal, just trees and birds and sunshine. We spent the rest of the day on the deck. I kept my eyes on the tree line, jumping at every rustle of leaves. Mark tried to get me to relax, bringing me beers, suggesting we grill dinner, but I couldn't settle. As the sun started to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, my anxiety grew worse. The thought of spending another night there, with just a flimsy wooden wall between us and whatever it was, made me feel physically ill. I want to go home, I finally said. Tonight. I don't want to stay here. Mark sighed. Sarah, it's already getting dark. We've been drinking. We should just stay and leave in the morning. I can't, I said, and I started to cry. I can't stay here another night. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, let's pack up. We threw our things into bags haphazardly. I kept glancing out the windows as the daylight faded. The forest beyond our clearing seemed to grow denser, darker with each passing minute. Just as we were about to leave, Mark realized he'd left his wallet on the deck. "I'll be right back," he said, heading for the back door. I stood in the living room, our bags at my feet, keys in hand. Through the window, I could see Mark on the deck, searching the table where we'd been sitting. And beyond him, at the edge of the clearing, a shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, just standing there, watching. "Mark," I called, my voice strained. "Mark, come inside now." He found his wallet and turned back toward the house. "Got it! Mark, run!" I screamed. He must have heard the panic in my voice because he sprinted for the door. As he reached it, I glanced back at the tree line. The shadow was gone. Mark burst inside, slamming the door behind him. "What? What is it?" "It's back," I whispered. "It was watching us." He turned and looked out the window. "I don't see anything." It was there, right at the edge of the trees. Mark locked the door and pulled the curtain closed. "Let's go," he said quietly. We grabbed our bags and practically ran to the car. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that figure emerging from the darkness, but there was nothing. As we drove away, I couldn't help looking back at the cabin, growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Just before we turned onto the main road, I swear I saw movement in our headlights. Something large crossing the road behind us, heading into the woods. We haven't been back to the cabin since. Mark wants to sell it, but I haven't agreed yet. Part of me feels like I need to go back, to confirm what I saw, to prove to myself that I'm not crazy. I've researched similar sightings in the area. There are a few hikers reporting tall, hair-covered figures in the national forest about 20 miles from our cabin. Nothing recent, though. I still don't know what I saw that morning. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my mind. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just a trick of the light, my imagination running wild in that liminal space between sleep and waking. But then I remember the way it moved, the way it looked directly at me, the absolute certainty I felt in that moment that I was seeing something that shouldn't exist. And I know deep down that whatever was in our woods that morning wasn't human. It wasn't anything I can explain, and I'm terrified that someday it might come back. Story 12. I've been working as a woodcutter for over 15 years now, mostly in the forests of Washington state. Until last October, I'd never been afraid in the woods. The forest was like a second home to me. Now I can barely bring myself to go back. I needed to stockpile some extra firewood for the winter, so I decided to head out to a spot in Skagit County I'd used before, near where the Sauk and Suattle rivers meet. It's dense old-growth forest, lots of Douglas fir, western hemlock and western red cedar. Some of those trees have been standing for hundreds of years. It was already getting dark when I arrived, around 6 in the evening. But that's nothing unusual in my line of work. I've cut wood at night plenty of times before. I had my headlamp, which gives me about 40 to 50 feet of visibility, and my chainsaw was gassed up and ready to go. The fog was rolling in pretty thick, but again, nothing I wasn't used to in this part of Washington. I parked my truck at the edge of an old logging road and hiked in about 150 feet to where I knew there was some good fallen timber. The forest was dead quiet that night. No birds, no small animals scurrying around. I remember thinking it was weird, but I was focused on getting my work done. I'd been cutting for maybe an hour when my chainsaw sputtered and died. I figured I'd run out of gas, which was annoying but not a big deal. I set the saw down and straightened up to stretch my back. That's when I felt it, this weird sensation of being watched. You know that feeling when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It was like that, but 100 times worse. I swung my headlamp around slowly, scanning the trees. The fog was making these weird shapes in the beam of light, and for a second, I thought I was just seeing things. Then my light caught something that made my blood freeze. About 40 feet away, partially hidden behind a massive cedar, was something huge. At first, My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was standing upright on two legs, like a person. But it wasn't a person, not even close. This thing was massive. I'm 6'1", and it towered over what I'd consider normal human height. I'd guess 8, maybe 9 feet tall, and it was just standing there, watching me. The most unsettling part was its posture. It had its arms crossed over its chest, like it was studying me, judging me. The light from my headlamp caught its eyes, which reflected back with a dull yellowish glow. Its body was covered in what looked like grayish hair or fur. Not like a bear. This was different. The proportions were all wrong for a bear. The shoulders were too broad, the arms too long, and bears don't stand like that, with their arms crossed, staring at you like they're thinking. I stood there frozen for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a person in a costume? No way. We were miles from anywhere, and nobody in their right mind would be. Out here in the dark, playing pranks. Besides, the size and proportions were impossible for a human. Then it shifted its weight slightly, and I heard a soft crunch of underbrush. That small movement snapped me out of my paralysis. Pure instinct took over, and I just ran. I didn't even think about my chainsaw or my gear. I just turned and sprinted back toward my truck as fast as I could. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as I ran. The forest that had always felt so familiar now felt alien and threatening. Branches whipped at my face, and I stumbled over roots and fallen logs, but I didn't slow down. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, to feel something grab me from behind, but there was nothing. Just the sound of my own frantic breathing and feet pounding on the forest floor. When I reached my truck, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see that thing emerging from the trees. I didn't see anything, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I started the truck and got the hell out of there, driving way too fast on those narrow forest roads. I didn't stop until I was back on the main highway with other cars around me. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept seeing those eyes in the darkness. I told my wife what happened, but I could tell she thought I was exaggerating or had seen a bear in the poor light. Maybe I was hoping she'd convince me that's what it was. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear. I left all my equipment out there, an expensive chainsaw and some other tools. For months, I couldn't bring myself to go back for them. The financial loss hurt, but not enough to make me return to that spot. Finally, after about 3 months, I decided I needed to face my fears. I contacted a local investigator named John Carlson, who specializes in, well, unusual wilderness encounters. He agreed to accompany me back to the site, along with his colleague Drew. We went during daylight, which made me feel marginally better, but my stomach was in knots the entire drive there. When we arrived at the spot where I'd parked that night, I almost couldn't get out of the car. It took everything I had to lead them into the forest, to where I'd abandoned my chainsaw. Surprisingly, we found it right where I'd left it. No animal had disturbed it. No one had stolen it. It was just sitting there like time had stood still. But what really shook me were the tracks we found nearby. The forest floor was covered with a soft layer of moss and lichen, and pressed into it were footprints. Not human footprints. These were huge, 14 or 15 inches long at least. You could clearly see toe impressions and a defined heel. John pointed out something that made my skin crawl, a ridge about 3 inches from the heel that he called a mid-tarsal break or transverse tarsal joint. He said it's a feature found in great apes but not humans. There were smaller prints too, maybe 9 inches long, like whatever I'd seen had a juvenile with it, a family. The thought made me feel sick, not just one of these things but multiple creatures living in these woods, watching us. As we investigated, the forest started to get dark again. We'd been there longer than planned, and I was getting increasingly anxious. We decided to head back to the vehicles. but somehow got turned around. The forest that I thought I knew so well suddenly seemed unfamiliar. John had a GPS, but even with that we struggled to find our way back. Just as we finally got oriented and were heading in the right direction, we heard it. About 150 feet away, something massive was moving through the underbrush. Not like a deer or even a bear, this was something big and heavy, snapping branches and rustling vegetation. We couldn't see it through the trees, but we could track its movement by sound. None of us said a word. We just looked at each other and picked up our pace. On our way out, John's flashlight caught something that stopped us in our tracks. A western hemlock, about 12 to 14 inches in diameter, had been snapped off about 7 feet above the ground. Not blown down by wind, not rotted and fallen, snapped clean off, as if something incredibly strong had broken it with its bare hands. John examined it closely and said it was recent, maybe within the last few days. The tree was healthy, with no signs of disease or weakness. It would have taken tremendous force to break it like that. We made it back to our vehicles without any further incidents, but the whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what was out there. John was convinced that what I'd seen was real. A Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. He believed there was a family group living in that area. It's been 6 months now and I still haven't gone back into those woods. I've started cutting in different areas, always with a partner and never after dark. Some people think I'm crazy when I tell them what happened, but I know what I saw. Those who've been out there with me afterward, who've seen the evidence with their own eyes, they believe me. I still have nightmares about those eyes watching me from the darkness, about those massive footprints in the soft forest floor, about that broken tree, snapped like it was nothing more than a twig. I don't know what's out there in the forests of Skagit County. I don't know if it's what people call Bigfoot or Sasquatch or something else entirely. All I know is that I saw something that shouldn't exist, something that watches and waits in the darkness. And sometimes, late at night, I still get that feeling of being watched, even in my own home. Story 13. I never believed in any of that Bigfoot stuff. Sure, I watched those shows where they hunt for Sasquatch with their night vision cameras and make bird calls in the woods. Always thought it was just entertainment, you know. That changed last summer, and I'm still trying to make sense of what happened to me and my buddy Tyler when we went camping near Heavener, Oklahoma. We'd been to this spot a few times before. It's about 3 miles from the nearest real road, down an old logging trail that my F-150 handles pretty well if it hasn't rained too much. The camping area isn't official or anything, just a cleared area by a small lake that locals know about. There's a little rocky beach below the main camping spot where you can fish if you want. The whole appeal of this place is that nobody goes there. You can have a weekend without seeing another human being, which was exactly what we wanted. Tyler and I had been planning this trip for months. Work had been killing both of us. I'm a contractor and he manages a warehouse. We needed to just disconnect, drink some beers, maybe catch some fish, and not think about deadlines or bosses for a few days. We arrived around noon that Saturday. The weather was perfect, not too hot for June in Oklahoma, maybe low 80s with a slight breeze. We set up our tent, got the camp chairs out, put the cooler between us, and just started unwinding. By late afternoon, we'd had a couple beers each and were just bullshitting about work, sports, the usual stuff. It was about 5:15 when we heard it. I remember checking my watch because the sound made me stop mid-sentence and I wanted to note when it started. It was this whooping noise, kind of like an owl but much deeper and louder. Whoop, whoop, with these long pauses in between. It was far off, but clear enough that we both stopped talking immediately. "What the hell is that?" Tyler asked, sitting up straighter in his chair. "No idea," I said. "Some kind of bird, maybe?" But it didn't sound like any bird I'd ever heard. The sound continued, for maybe 2 minutes, repeating every 15 seconds or so. Then it stopped as suddenly as it started. Tyler and I looked at each other, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. Kinda sounds like those Bigfoot calls they play on those shows, he said with a nervous laugh. Yeah, right, I said, trying to laugh it off. Probably just some weird bird. We went back to our conversation, but there was this new tension in the air. About 20 minutes later, we heard something else, knocking sounds coming from down near the beach area below our campsite. Knock, 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 slow, deliberate, powerful. Woodpecker? Tyler suggested. I shook my head. Too slow for a woodpecker, and too loud. The knocking continued, always in sets of 3, with long pauses between. I've heard woodpeckers my whole life, and this wasn't that. This sounded like someone taking a heavy stick and slamming it against a tree trunk with serious force. And then Tyler said something that made my skin crawl. You know, in those Bigfoot documentaries, they say they communicate by knocking on trees. I didn't want to admit it, but I'd heard the same thing. That's just TV bullshit, I said, but I wasn't convinced anymore. Let's try something, Tyler said, standing up. He grabbed 2 logs from our firewood pile, decent-sized ones, maybe 8 inches long and 3 inches thick. Before I could stop him, he knocked them together 3 times, loud and deliberate. What the hell are you doing? I hissed. Just an experiment, he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. We waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Nothing happened. I started to relax. See, nothing out there but knock, knock, knock. The response came from much closer than the earlier knocking, and it was followed by another set of knocks from a completely different direction. Then a third set from somewhere else entirely. Fuck, Tyler whispered. Marcus, are you hearing this? I nodded, my mouth suddenly too dry to speak. It sounded like we were surrounded by whatever was making those knocks. I scanned the tree line around our campsite, but couldn't see anything moving in the dense forest. That's when the first rock flew into our camp. It wasn't a pebble or a small stone. This was a substantial rock, maybe 4 or 5 inches across, and it landed with a heavy thud about 10 feet from where we were sitting. Before we could react, another one came flying in from a different direction, landing closer to us. What the fuck? I jumped up, my heart pounding. Is someone messing with us? A third rock smashed into our cooler, denting the metal side. These weren't being tossed, they were being hurled with serious force. Tyler and I instinctively moved closer together, backing toward our tent. The sun was starting to set, and the forest around us was getting darker by the minute. We stood there, both of us scanning the tree line, trying to catch any movement. Should we leave? Tyler asked quietly. I thought about it. It would take us at least 30 minutes to pack everything up, and it was getting dark fast. The drive out on that rough trail in the dark didn't seem like a great option either. Let's wait it out, I said. Maybe it's just some local kids messing with us. But deep down, I knew that couldn't be right. We hadn't seen another vehicle all day, and the nearest house was miles away. No kids would be out here alone, especially not as darkness fell. For the next few hours, we sat with our backs against a large tree, facing the campsite. The rock throwing stopped around 8:30, but the knocking continued sporadically from different directions. We built a fire, hoping the light and smoke would keep whatever it was at bay. Around 10:30, everything went quiet. No more knocking, no more rocks. Just the normal sounds of the forest at night, crickets, the occasional hoot of a real owl, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Maybe they left, Tyler said hopefully. Maybe, I agreed, but neither of us believed it. We decided to try to get some sleep around 11. The tent was a 3-person dome tent, pretty sturdy, with small mesh windows that we kept covered with the rain flaps for privacy. We zipped ourselves in, both fully dressed with our boots still on, just in case we needed to make a quick exit. I had my hunting knife, and Tyler had a heavy mag-light flashlight that could double as a weapon if needed. I'm not sure when I finally dozed off, but I woke to the sound of Tyler's sharp intake of breath. The inside of the tent was pitch black. I checked my watch, 2:17 in the morning. "What is it?" I whispered, barely audible. "Listen," he breathed back. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps circling our tent. Not the sound of a person walking. These were too heavy, too spread apart. Whatever was walking around our tent had a stride much longer than a human's. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent wall near my head. Then came a sound that I'll never forget as long as I live. Sniffing, deep, powerful inhalations, moving slowly along the tent wall. It sounded like a dog sniffing for food, but much louder, much more intense. It was smelling us, trying to figure out what was inside the tent. I could feel Tyler trembling next to me. My own body was frozen in terror. My hand gripped the knife so hard my fingers went numb, but I knew it would be useless against whatever was out there. Its breathing was so loud and heavy I could hear the air moving in and out of its lungs. The sniffing continued around the perimeter of the tent, pausing occasionally. When it reached the door, I thought I might have a heart attack. The nylon door bulged slightly inward, as if something was pressing against it gently. We didn't move, didn't speak, barely breathed. I don't know how long we lay there. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, the pressure on the door released, and the footsteps slowly moved away from the tent. Neither of us slept after that. We lay there in silence, straining to hear any sound of its return. Eventually, the sky began to lighten, and birds started their morning calls. By 6 in the morning, it was fully light outside, and we finally dared to unzip the tent and look out. Everything looked normal. Our campsite was undisturbed, except for the rocks that had been thrown the previous evening. The forest looked peaceful in the morning light. But something felt different, like the woods were holding their breath. Without discussing it, we started packing up. We worked quickly and silently, constantly scanning the tree line. It took us less than 20 minutes to break down the entire camp and load everything into my truck. As I was doing a final sweep of the campsite, I noticed something on the ground near where the tent had been. Footprints. But not human footprints. These were massive, easily 16 inches long and incredibly wide, with what looked like 5 toes. The impression was deep in the soft earth, suggesting whatever made it was extremely heavy. I called Tyler over and pointed at the prints. He stared at them, then looked at me with wide eyes. "Let's go," he said quietly. "Now." We practically jumped into my truck. As I started the engine and began navigating the rough trail out, Tyler finally broke our silence. "We're never talking about this to anyone, are we?" "Who would believe us?" I replied. "But here I am, telling this story. I've spent months trying to convince myself it was all some elaborate prank, or that we somehow misinterpreted natural phenomena. But I know what we heard, I know what we saw, and I know that something found us that night in the woods near Heavener. I haven't been camping since. Neither has Tyler. Whatever's out there in those woods, it knows we were there. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I swear I can still hear that deep, whooping call in the distance, followed by 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Story 14. I've never posted about this before, but I think I'm finally ready to get it off my chest. This happened back in 2017 during a hunting trip with my buddies Mike and Dave in the mountains south of Coleman, Alberta. We'd been planning this trip for months, just us guys getting away from work and family stress for a weekend of hunting and drinking beer around the campfire. That plan went straight to hell. We drove out on a Friday afternoon in Dave's truck, pulling his 18-foot trailer behind us. It was a decent trailer. Nothing fancy, just something with bunks and a small kitchen area so we wouldn't have to sleep in tents. The road got pretty rough the last 7 miles in, mostly just old logging roads that hadn't been maintained in years. We were bouncing around so much that Mike spilled his coffee all over himself, which had us laughing our asses off. We finally found a decent spot to set up camp around 4 in the afternoon. It was this small clearing surrounded by thick forest, about half a mile from a stream where Dave had caught some nice trout the year before. The mountains towered above us on all sides, and man, it felt good to be out in the wilderness. The air was crisp, You know that clean mountain air smell that just feels different than city air? Since we arrived later than planned and wanted to get our gear organized before dark, we decided to just park the trailer and not bother with leveling it or lowering the jacks. It wasn't perfectly level, but it wasn't bad enough to matter for just a weekend. We figured we'd fix it in the morning if it bothered us. We spent the evening getting our hunting gear ready, drinking a few beers, and grilling some steaks on a small portable BBQ. It was a clear night, and you could see a million stars overhead, the kind of view you never get in the city. We stayed up talking until about 11, just bullshitting about work and life. I needed to take a leak before bed, so I stepped outside the trailer. The temperature had dropped, and it was probably in the low 40s. The forest was pitch black beyond the small area lit by our lantern. I walked about 20 feet from the trailer to do my business when I heard this weird sound, branches snapping, but in a rhythmic way. Snap, snap, snap. It wasn't random, like when a deer moves through brush. Whatever was making that noise was big and moving deliberately. My first thought was bear. We'd seen bear scat on the drive-in, and this area was known for having both black bears and the occasional grizzly. I zipped up fast and hustled back to the trailer, not wanting to mess with a bear in the dark. "Guys, I think there's something out there," I said when I got back inside. "Sounds like it could be a bear." Dave grabbed his flashlight and shined it out the window, but we couldn't see anything in the darkness. "Probably just a deer," Mike said, already half asleep in his bunk. "Or maybe an elk." The snapping was too heavy for a deer, I insisted. "Whatever it is, it's big." Dave shrugged. "Well, we've got the guns if anything tries to get in, and bears usually avoid people unless they smell food." We'd hung our food bag in a tree about 100 yards from camp, which is standard procedure in bear country. I wasn't too worried, but I double-checked that the trailer door was locked before climbing into my bunk. Despite being slightly on edge, I eventually dozed off around midnight. I woke up to absolute chaos. The trailer was shaking violently, not just rocking, but being thrashed from side to side. The whole thing was moving so hard that I was thrown from my bunk onto the floor. Dave and Mike were yelling, also thrown from their beds. The silverware and dishes were flying out of the cabinets, crashing all around us. The windows were rattling so hard I thought they'd shatter. "What the fuck is happening?" Mike screamed, trying to grab onto something to stabilize himself. "Is it an earthquake?" Dave shouted as he was slammed against the wall. But this wasn't like any earthquake I'd ever felt or heard about. It felt directed, intentional, like something was physically grabbing the trailer and shaking it. The whole thing tilted so far to one side that I was sure we were about to flip over. I remember thinking we were all going to die, trapped in an overturned trailer in the middle of nowhere. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The trailer settled back, still rocking slightly from the momentum. We all froze, listening. The silence was deafening after all that noise. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The digital clock on the microwave read 2:27 a.m. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, afraid that whatever caused it might hear us. "Bear," Dave said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Had to be a grizzly." "No bear is strong enough to shake an 18-foot trailer like that," Mike said, his voice shaking. "No fucking way." We sat in silence for maybe 5 minutes, just listening. I could hear something moving outside, heavy footsteps circling the trailer, but they sounded wrong. Not like a four-legged animal, more deliberate. "We need to see what's out there," Dave finally said, reaching for his rifle. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "Whatever that is nearly flipped us over. We can't just sit here," he argued. "What if it comes back? What if it breaks in?" I knew he was right. Mike grabbed his shotgun, I took my .36, and Dave had his .308. We loaded them with shaking hands. The plan was to turn on all our flashlights at once and exit together. "On 3, Dave whispered. 1, 2, 3. We burst out of the trailer door, flashlights sweeping the darkness, guns ready. But there was nothing there, nothing visible anyway. The clearing looked empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from the tree line. The forest seemed darker than before, almost like it was absorbing our flashlight beams. "See anything?" Mike whispered. "Nothing," Dave replied, his light scanning the edges of the clearing. We did a full circle around the trailer, staying close together. The ground behind the trailer was disturbed, like something heavy had moved through there. The pine needles and dirt were scraped away in places, exposing bare soil underneath. But there were no distinct footprints we could identify, just these weird, long depressions in the ground. "I don't like this," I said. "Let's get back inside." We retreated to the trailer, locking the door behind us. None of us slept for the rest of the night. We sat with our guns ready, jumping at every sound from the forest. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows around 6 a.m., we finally relaxed a little. "Let's check outside again in the daylight," Dave suggested. With the morning light, we could see the disturbances in the ground more clearly. Something had definitely moved through the area behind our trailer, but whatever it was hadn't left normal tracks. Just these weird, smooth depressions, like something heavy had been dragged through. What could make marks like this? Mike wondered, crouching down to examine them. That's when Dave called us over to the trailer itself. "Guys, you need to see this." He was pointing at the upper corners of the trailer. On both sides, about 8 feet off the ground, were these massive, smudged marks. They looked almost like handprints, but bigger than any human hand I've ever seen. The smudges were symmetrical on both sides of the trailer, suggesting that whatever had made them had grabbed the trailer from both sides at once. I felt sick looking at them. "That's not a bear," I said quietly. "Bears have claws. They'd leave scratch marks, not these." "And no bear could reach 8 feet high on both sides at the same time," Mike added, his face pale. What the hell could do this? We stood there in silence for a long moment, each of us trying to process what we were seeing. The implications were terrifying. Whatever had grabbed our trailer was tall, much taller than a person, with an enormous arm span and strong enough to violently rock an 18-foot trailer with 3 grown men inside. "I think we should pack up," Dave finally said. "Now!" No one argued. We threw our gear into the truck haphazardly, not bothering to organize anything. I kept looking over my shoulder at the forest edge, half expecting to see something watching us. The whole time we were packing, the woods were eerily silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Just dead silence, like the wildlife knew to stay away. We were on the road within 20 minutes, driving way too fast down that rough logging road, the trailer bouncing wildly behind us. No one spoke for the first hour of the drive. What was there to say? We'd experienced something none of us could explain. "Maybe it was some kind of prank," Mike finally suggested, breaking the silence. "Like, maybe other hunters were messing with us." "How would anyone shake a trailer like that?" I countered. "And those marks were 8 feet high. Who do you know that's 8 feet tall with hands that size?" He didn't have an answer for that. We've tried to rationalize it in the years since. Maybe it was some freak windstorm. Maybe a moose rubbed against the trailer. Maybe we were all just tired and imagined the severity of it. But none of those explanations account for those handprint-like smudges high up on both sides of the trailer. The 3 of us made a pact never to go back to that spot again. We've gone hunting since then, but always in different areas, more populated places. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I still feel that violent rocking motion, still hear the sound of something huge moving around our trailer in the darkness. I don't know what found us that night. In the mountains south of Coleman, I don't want to know. But sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for someone else to make the mistake of camping in its territory. Story 15. I never thought I'd be sharing this. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened back in April of 2023, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. Some experiences change you forever, and this one definitely changed me. My name's Kyle. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, saw things there that most people couldn't imagine, but nothing, absolutely nothing, in my military career prepared me for what I encountered in the Wichita Mountains. It was supposed to be a simple night out stargazing. There was talk of a meteor shower, and my brother Ethan thought it would be cool to drive out where we could get a clear view of the sky. So it was the 4 of us, me, Ethan, his wife Melissa, and my girlfriend Amber. We'd been dating about 8 months at that point. She'd never been stargazing before, and I remember how excited she was on the drive up, talking about how she'd never seen the Milky Way with her own eyes. We took my truck, a Ford F-150 that's seen better days, but still handles the rough terrain well enough. The plan was to drive into the mountains, find a clearing, and just enjoy the night sky away from city lights. Simple enough, right? We left around 7 in the evening. It was still light out when we started driving, but by the time we reached the mountains, the sun had already set. I remember the temperature dropped pretty quickly once we got deeper into the forest. Amber kept commenting on how the trees seemed to swallow up the last bits of daylight. I knew these mountains pretty well. My grandfather, who was full Cherokee, used to take me and Ethan camping here when we were kids. He'd tell us stories about the forest spirits and how they protected these lands. I never really believed those stories, just thought they were his way of keeping us from wandering off at night. Now, I'm not so sure. We found this old logging road that I knew about, barely maintained and mostly forgotten. It led to a small clearing near a dry creek bed, perfect for what we wanted. The trees were thick around us, creating this bowl of darkness. I parked the truck facing outward, just in case we needed to leave in a hurry. Old habit from my time overseas, I guess. By 9:30 it was pitch black, and I mean pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels heavy, like it's pressing in on you from all sides. The stars were incredible though, millions of them, so bright and clear, it was like you could reach up and touch them. Amber was mesmerized. Melissa and Ethan were cuddled up on a blanket we'd spread on the truck bed. The weird thing was the silence. I noticed it right away, but didn't say anything at first. In the mountains, you expect to hear things. Owls hooting, insects chirping, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But there was nothing. Absolute silence. Just our voices and the occasional creak of the truck as it cooled down. "Is it always this quiet out here?" Amber whispered to me, and I shook my head. It wasn't normal. Even Ethan noticed it. "Kinda creepy, isn't it?" he said, looking around at the trees surrounding us. "Like everything's holding its breath." We stayed in the truck with the windows down, just talking quietly and scanning the sky for meteors. We saw a few bright streaks of light that Melissa kept trying to capture on her phone. But after about an hour, we were getting restless. "I'm gonna stretch my legs," I told the others, opening my door. "Ethan, you want to walk down to the creek bed? Should be able to see the sky even better from there." Ethan agreed, and we told the girls we'd be back in a few minutes. They stayed in the truck, Amber now in the driver's seat fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station that would come through. Melissa was still taking pictures of the sky. The darkness felt different once we were away from the truck, more complete somehow. I switched on my flashlight, and Ethan did the same. The beams seemed to get swallowed up by the darkness after just a few feet. We walked maybe 30 yards from the truck, toward where the creek bed should be. That's when I felt it. A change in the air pressure, subtle but unmistakable. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I got that familiar feeling I used to get on patrol, the feeling of being watched. I stopped walking, and Ethan bumped into me from behind. "What's up?" he asked, his voice sounding too loud in the silence. "Not sure," I replied, sweeping my flashlight in a slow arc across the tree line. "Something feels off." And that's when we saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a darker patch against the black backdrop of the pines. I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me, but then it moved. It stepped forward from behind a massive pine tree about 30 yards away. The movement was deliberate, almost casual, like it didn't care that we were watching. And Jesus Christ, it was huge. I'm 6'1", and this thing towered over what I could imagine my height would look like from that distance. 8, maybe 9 feet tall. My flashlight beam caught it for just a second before I instinctively lowered it, some primal part of my brain warning me not to provoke whatever this was. But that second was enough. I saw a massive body covered in black hair, not matted or tangled like you might expect from a wild animal, but almost sleek, like it was well kept. It had shoulders broader than any human I've ever seen, long arms that hung down past where its knees would be. The thing that really struck me, though, and this is what I can't explain, was its build. Beneath that hair, you could see muscle definition. Not just bulk, but actual defined muscles, like a bodybuilder. A massive chest, powerful, arms, even what looked like abs. This wasn't some shaggy beast. Whatever this was, had a physique that would put most humans to shame. I heard Ethan's breathing quicken beside me. His hand grabbed my arm, fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises I'd find the next day. "Kyle," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Are you seeing this?" I couldn't even respond. My throat had closed up completely. The creature stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it did something that chills me to this day. It looked directly at us. I couldn't make out facial features clearly in the dark, but I felt its gaze lock onto us. There was intelligence in that look, awareness. It wasn't startled or aggressive. If anything, it seemed curious. Then it raised something to its mouth, I couldn't see what, chewed briefly, and turned away. It walked back into the forest with a smooth, upright gait. No hunching, no knuckle walking like a gorilla. It moved like a person, just impossibly large and powerful. As soon as it disappeared into the trees, the spell broke. I heard screaming coming from the truck, Melissa's voice high and terrified. Ethan and I spun around and ran back toward the vehicle, practically tripping over ourselves. When we got there, Melissa was hysterical, pointing toward where we'd just been. Amber was pale as a ghost, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. "Did you see it?" Melissa kept asking between sobs. "It was watching you. It was right there watching you." They'd seen it from the truck. While we were looking at it, it had been looking at all of us. "What the fuck was that?" Ethan kept repeating as we piled back into the truck. That's when I noticed he had his phone in his hand. "Were you filming?" I asked, stunned. He nodded, his hands shaking as he tried to pull up the video. I started recording as soon as I saw something move. I don't know if I got anything, it's so dark out here. Before we could look at the footage, Amber suddenly gasped and pointed out the window on my side. "There's something else," she whispered, her voice trembling. "On the ground, moving toward us." I looked where she was pointing and felt my blood run cold. Something was crawling through the brush at the edge of the clearing, moving low to the ground. Unlike the bipedal creature we'd just seen, this thing was on all fours, moving quickly and silently. I couldn't make out details, just a brownish shape sliding through the undergrowth with an unnatural smoothness. Melissa started screaming again, louder this time. "Get us out of here, now!" I didn't need to be told twice. Amber was already turning the key in the ignition. The truck roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. In that brief illumination, I caught a glimpse of something retreating back into the trees, something that definitely wasn't a deer or any other animal I recognized. We peeled out of there, tires spitting dirt and gravel. I took over driving once we hit the logging road, pushing the truck as fast as I dared on the rough terrain. Nobody spoke until we reached paved road again, and even then, it was just Melissa asking repeatedly if we were far enough away yet. Once we were back on the highway, heading toward civilization, Ethan pulled up the video on his phone. We huddled around it at a gas station parking lot. the harsh fluorescent lights making the darkness in the video seem even more impenetrable. The quality was terrible, just flashlight beams bouncing around and darkness. But for a few seconds, there it was. A tall, dark figure, standing upright in the distance. The video didn't capture any of the details I'd seen with my own eyes, but it was clearly something large and bipedal where no person should have been. We debated about what to do with the footage. Part of me wanted to share it, to have someone else validate what we'd seen, but the rational part of me knew how it would look. Just another blurry, Bigfoot video that nobody would take seriously. In the end, we decided to keep it to ourselves. Ethan saved it to his cloud storage, and we all agreed not to talk about it to anyone who wasn't there. But I can't stop thinking about it. I've never believed in Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it. I'm a practical person. I believe in what I can see and touch and explain. But I can't explain what we saw that night. It's been 6 months now, and I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, remembering the way that thing looked at us, the casual, almost dismissive way it acknowledged our presence before walking away. Like we weren't a threat, weren't even interesting enough to concern it. Amber and I are still together, but we don't go hiking or camping anymore. She gets anxious even driving through heavily wooded areas. Sometimes I'll catch her staring into the trees along the highway with this look of dread on her face. I served in war zones. I've been shot at, been near IEDs when they went off. I know what fear feels like, but nothing in my experience compares to the primal terror I felt in those mountains. It wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was the sudden, jarring realization that maybe I don't understand the world as well as I thought I did. That there are things out there, living alongside us, that defy explanation. I don't know what we saw that night in the Wichita Mountains. I don't know what that second creature was, the one crawling toward our truck. But I know what I saw, and I know I never want to see it again. Sometimes I think about my grandfather's stories, the ones I always dismissed as superstition. He used to say that the mountains have guardians, ancient spirits that protect the land from those who don't respect it. They've been here longer than us, he'd say, and they'll be here long after we're gone. I never gave those stories much thought before. Now, I can't stop thinking about them. Now, story 16. I still have trouble sleeping at night. Every sound makes me jerk awake, and I find myself staring out the windows for hours. What happened that evening in August last year changed everything for me. I've had encounters before, but nothing like this. Nothing where they came so close, so deliberately. I live alone in a small cabin outside Winthrop. It's pretty isolated. The nearest neighbor is about a mile away, and I'm right up against national forest land. I've always loved the solitude, the quiet. I moved here after my divorce in 2010, needed to get away from everything. The place isn't much, just a one-bedroom cabin with a decent-sized porch that wraps around half the house. From there, I can see the tree line about 50 yards out. That evening, August 12th, 2020, was warm but not uncomfortable. The sun was just starting to set, and I was sitting on my porch with a beer, just watching the forest darken. I don't know why I did it. I still don't. I picked up 2 smooth river rocks from the pile I keep for my fire pit and started striking them together. Nothing crazy, just an idle, repetitive motion. Click-clack, click-clack. The sound was oddly satisfying in the quiet. I'd been doing this for about 10 minutes when I got this weird feeling. The birds had stopped singing. The forest was dead silent. Even the usual breeze seemed to have died down. The hair on my arm stood up, and I remember thinking, something's watching me. I stopped with the rocks and scanned the tree line. That's when I saw movement. At first I thought maybe it was deer or elk. We get a lot of wildlife out here. But these shapes were all wrong. They were standing upright, moving deliberately. 4 of them. 4 massive, hair-covered figures emerged from the trees. They weren't rushing, just walking slowly, spread out in a loose line. The way they moved, It wasn't like a bear on its hind legs, all awkward and unbalanced. These things walked like they were meant to be upright. Even from that distance, I could tell they were huge. The closest one, I'm guessing it was the male, the alpha or whatever, was massive. Easily over 9 feet tall, with broad shoulders and thick dark hair covering its entire body. It stopped about 60 yards from my porch, just standing there. The other 3 spread out to its sides, 2 of them moving closer, maybe 20 yards from where I sat. I was frozen, couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then the big one let out this sound that I still hear in my nightmares. It wasn't a roar like a bear or a scream like a mountain lion. It was almost human, but distorted, deep and guttural, but with this high-pitched edge that made my bones vibrate. It sounded enraged, territorial, like I'd called them with those rocks and they were pissed about it. The scream seemed to last forever, echoing off the mountains. When it finally stopped, there was this awful silence, just me and these 4 massive creatures staring at each other. The 2 closest ones, they were smaller, maybe females or younger ones, I don't know. They just stood there watching me. I could see their eyes reflecting the fading light. They were dark eyes, intelligent, not animal eyes. They were looking at me, not just in my direction. They were assessing me. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Felt like hours, but was probably just minutes. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. My beer was still in my hand, half raised to my mouth. My other hand was clenched so tight around one of the rocks that my fingers went numb. Then, like they'd received some silent signal, all 4 turned at the same time. They didn't rush, didn't seem frightened. They just turned and walked back into the trees, heading toward this deep ravine about 100 yards beyond the tree line. The biggest one looked back once, just before it disappeared into the shadows. I swear it nodded at me, like it was saying, "We'll be back." When they were gone, I sat there for another hour, too terrified to move. When I finally went inside, I locked every door and window, pushed furniture against the doors, and spent the night huddled in my bedroom with my shotgun. This wasn't my first encounter with these things. I've been seeing them on and off since I moved out here. The first time was back in October 2011 at my old property in Morton. I was washing dishes after dinner around 7 p.m. when I heard this heavy breathing outside. It wasn't like a deer snorting or a bear huffing. It was deep, controlled breathing, like a runner trying to catch their breath. I looked out toward my woodshed and saw it. A massive silhouette moving through the shadows, broad shoulders covered in hair, walking on 2 legs. It moved with purpose, not like an animal. I stood there, dish towel in hand, watching until it disappeared into the trees. I told myself it was just a bear, but I knew better. Then, in September 2012, I was out hunting. I was in my tree stand about 10 miles from my property, waiting for deer. Around noon, I heard branches breaking. Not the small sounds deer make, but heavy, deliberate steps. Out from between 2 massive pines stepped this creature. It was tall. I'm 6'3", and this thing towered over me even from a distance. Had to be at least 9 feet tall, gray-colored hair covering its body. I estimated it weighed at least 600 pounds. It didn't see me at first. It was sniffing the air, looking around. Then its head snapped in my direction, and our eyes met. I've never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. It stared at me for about 30 seconds, then turned and walked away. Not running, not scared, just leaving. The November after that was the closest one before last August. I was in my kitchen making dinner. It was already dark outside, around 6 p.m. I felt that same sensation of being watched and looked up at the window. Over my sink, there it was, a huge face peering in at me. The window's about 7 feet off the ground, so whatever this was, it was tall, broad-shouldered silhouette, just standing in my yard, watching me cook. This one seemed different, though. Not aggressive, just curious. It watched me for about a minute, then backed away slowly until I couldn't see it anymore. I ran outside with a flashlight, but it was gone. Over the years, I've seen them dozens of times, always at a distance, always brief. Dawn, midday, dusk, they don't seem to follow any pattern. I've tried setting up trail cameras, but I've never caught anything definitive. Just shadows, broken branches, footprints too big to be human but not shaped like any animal I know. But that night in August 2020 was different. They came as a group. They came close. They responded to me, to those rocks clicking together. Since then, I've found strange structures in the woods around my property. Stick formations that couldn't have happened naturally. Trees bent and twisted together. And twice, I've found dead deer near my property line, broken in ways that no normal predator would leave them. Last week, I was bringing in firewood at dusk when I heard those rocks clicking together from the edge of the forest. Click-clack, click-clack. The exact same rhythm I'd made that night. I dropped the wood and ran inside. I didn't go out again until morning. I don't know what these creatures are. I don't know what they want, but they're out there, watching, waiting. They know where I live. They know I'm alone. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear them moving around my cabin, breathing, communicating with low grunts and whistles. I've thought about moving, but where would I go? I've thought about telling authorities, but who would believe me? I've seen the looks people give when I've hinted at what's happening, like I'm crazy or attention-seeking. So I stay, and I wait, and I watch. I don't click rocks together anymore. I keep my shotgun loaded. I've installed motion lights all around the property, but deep down, I know none of that would stop them if they decided to come for me. Sometimes at night, I sit in the dark and stare out at the tree line, and I swear I can see eyes staring back, intelligent, patient eyes, waiting for what I don't know. All I know is that they're real, they're out there, and that night in August wasn't a coincidence. I called them somehow, and they answered, and I can't shake the feeling that sooner or later they'll call me too, and I'll have no choice but to answer.